We're ready. So are we ready?
You will be in about 30 seconds.
Kathy, I think John's on an attendee that you can put in.
Mhm.
Hello?
Okay, so John, if you can hear me, I promoted you to panelist. You've had a promotion. Okay, so Tim and Andrew need to unmute, unless you're doing this on purpose. There's John, so John needs to unmute.
Hello, Vanessa.
Hey, John, how are you? There's a little bit of a delay with YouTube, but you're recording on Zoom, so we can always upload that link after the fact. I'm trying to figure out what's wrong with YouTube.
So Chelsea, I don't know if you're muted on purpose, but you're muted in case you need to unmute.
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started because we got a lot to do tonight. Okay, so call the meeting to order at 6:02 p.m. And let me see my. So pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting of the Southborough Advisory Committee will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and/or parties with a right and/or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the Town of Southborough's website at www.southboroughtown.com. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch or participate in the meeting may do so in the following manner by finding the meeting at www.southboroughtown.com/remote meetings. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on Southborough's website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after this meeting. All right. So I've called the meeting to order. We don't have the minutes ready for last week, so we're going to skip that one. Everything else, we're caught up except for last week. We've got them all posted, or at least the town clerk has them ready to post. Okay, got a little brief update here. So Paul Semino just called as we were starting the meeting, and the meeting is on for June 13th, so it's a final decision. Details TBD. As you guys may know, the Department of Health has recommended that we not have an indoor meeting. So I guess they're going to start looking at maybe an outdoor meeting. He didn't say that, but that's what I'm guessing. But it is on for June 13th at 1 o'clock. Hi, Judy. Judy needs to unmute too. We're going to probably have a joint meeting with the Board of Selectmen next Tuesday. Details to follow on that too. It depends on what we get done tonight. They are hoping that we're going to at least decide tonight where we have differences and the budget that they have voted on. And then if we can get that far, then we will meet with them and try to reconcile those differences. Their meetings normally start at 6:30, so I imagine the joint one will start at 6:30. The last thing as far as chair's report is I have discussed with the personnel board chair our vote last week to change the position for IT to a full-time position starting July 1st. She's willing to amend, they're going to meet next Wednesday. They already had that scheduled. She's willing to amend their agenda to include this if we, at the end of tonight's meeting, still believe that is the right path. You know, we voted on this officially. So Andrew, we voted last week to, instead of adding the part-time person for IT, adding a full-time person because of what we talked about several times as far as the risk of something happening to Tom and not having someone that could step up immediately. All right. So that's all I've got as far as a chair's report. So I want to jump right into the budget unless someone has anything they want to insert at this point. All right. So I'm going to start screen sharing shortly, but let's at least kind of
All
summarize.
right, Kathy, are we going to hear from the Capital Committee on the fire truck first?
Not right this moment. We're going to hear from them very shortly. Why? Does he need to do it now to get off?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. So we're going to change around a little bit. So long story short, last week we had some questions on why the fire chief needed a new vehicle, new command vehicle. And Jason Malinowski is in the audience. Now he is, yeah, he's there. So I'm going to bring him in and he's going to update us on why the Capital Planning Committee, where they stand now. They actually haven't approved it yet there. And it's also not something we have to approve tonight. It's actually going to be considered at the fall special. But we might as well at least understand what their thought process is so we can take that into account with our thought process. Okay, so I'm going to make Jason panelist.
Can you hear me, Kathy?
I can. So Jason and Chelsea have their kids tied up right now, so we got to go quick.
Oh, one asleep and two distracted. So thanks for having me. So I know I kind of watched the replay of last week and went through kind of some of the questions. As all of you know, there were two vehicles, one for the police chief, one for the fire chief, that were originally slated for the spring town meeting. There was a question on why those two vehicles are different costs. They're candidly very different vehicles. The police chief's vehicle being around $38,000 is really what I'll call a standard Ford Explorer with a light package and some radios. There's no, normal items that you would add to a police cruiser because it's essentially the chief's personal vehicle. The fire chief's vehicle that was proposed, so the Capital Committee unanimously voted to continue that on the spring town meeting. The fire chief's vehicle we voted to delay until at least the fall town meeting, but I'll be honest, there was a lot of discussion of whether that's a 2 or 3 year away expense. And the main reason for that is it would be replacing a 2013 vehicle that only has 70,000 miles, but the chief's view is that you replace a vehicle at 10 years or 100,000 miles, whichever comes first, based on the use. So really, we viewed it more as a want as opposed to a dire need. And we're looking to try to space out the two vehicles that they have. For full transparency, the chief is currently driving a 2017 Ford Expedition, and he was just essentially looking to replicate that Expedition to have essentially two command vehicles. While that's a nice luxury to have, we were hoping that we could get them spread out in a way that, about every 5 years we were replacing one, as opposed to this would only be a 3-year replacement. So we kind of punted the discussion to the fall, but I wouldn't be surprised if we punt it beyond then, just based on some of the discussion on the Capital Committee. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but given that that was a major change, I just wanted to let you know that.
And Jason, the second vehicle is driven currently, or would be driven by the fire prevention officer?
Correct. So it's a fundamental change, and Chief Achilles has been here a year now. So Chief Achilles decided to drive what the fire prevention officer was driving, and Chief Morrow, the retired chief, is driving what now the fire prevention officer is driving. So the fire prevention officer puts about 4,000 miles a year on his vehicle. So we'll be able to get many more years out of that at 4,000 miles a year.
The 13 one.
Yeah, the 13 one. Yep.
And we've never had two command vehicles fully stocked, ready to go, right?
We haven't, but I'll be very honest. as a commanding fire officer in another community, it's a great benefit because chief has to have a personal vehicle. It's contractually obligated, and it allows the on-call officer to have and be able to pull up to a scene with all of the stuff they would need to run the scene. So there are distinct benefits to it, but given the times that we're in, it's, again, a nice luxury, and it's something that the community I work in planned for over a 5 or 6 year period to get it phased correctly. So now we're on about a 5-year period. We have 2 Tahoes that are about 5 years apart and can interchange them very consistently.
So the fire prevention officer's vehicle stays at the station when he goes home. So the second one would be available for someone else to jump into if Chief Achilles weren't going to be able to go.
Yeah, but yes, but it's not set up or large enough to carry what you need to carry to effectively run a fire scene. There's a lot of equipment that sits in the back of the vehicle that Chief Achilles takes home at night in terms of accountability and tracking systems for SCBA and other things that are just required to effectively run a fire scene.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions about this vehicle? So Jason could get back to his children.
Just a background question. Why does the on-duty officer not have that vehicle right now?
Which vehicle?
Well, I don't know how fire departments are run, but I would think
The 17, I think he's talking about, Jason.
right, the vehicle that has all of the equipment in the back and that can completely run.
So the chief, that's the chief's personal vehicle.
I guess what I'm asking is, wouldn't it make sense for the officer on duty to always have that capability as opposed to the chief who may or may not be getting to a scene?
I'm not going to comment for Chief Achilles. I think, Kathy, if that is a follow-up that Tim has, you should go to Chief Achilles. Every department runs it differently. In Southborough, I do know that the commanding officer on each shift is on a piece of apparatus. So they are showing up with that stuff on a fire truck as opposed to a command vehicle. My situation is a little different in that my chief may or may not show up, but we also have, we rely more on an on-call system as opposed to shift firefighters like Southborough does.
So Jason, Chief Achilles in his contract, he gets a vehicle, right? I mean, that's part of his contract.
Yeah, I mean, that's very standard for a fire chief.
Okay. All right, so we've got more time to talk about this one. This one's not June 13th.
Agreed.
Okay.
Yeah.
So at least, because I promised you guys I'd come back with an explanation when I couldn't last week. So there's that, but we'll talk more about it. We'll get more questions answered, but at least you got kind of a general idea of where we're going with that one. All right. Okay, thank you, Jason.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Too. All right, so now let's get back to what we're going to try to accomplish tonight. So where we left off last week, we basically took votes to do the following. We took a vote to support the new full-time youth and family services position, although it was a split vote, it was 4-2. We took a vote to then have all new positions, which included that position, included the IT position, included the 2 policemen to start July 1st. So that's kind of where we left off last week. And we voted to actually upgrade the IT position to full-time. So we've got the ability to do that. We've got time to get it done if we think that's the course we want to pursue. Personnel board seems to be very receptive to it, and will add us to the agenda to discuss it next Wednesday. All right, so if we want to do it, we can do it. So what I thought we'd start with tonight is we're actually not going to vote on the budget tonight. We're going to vote next Tuesday, I hope. What we need to do is end up with the differences that we have with the majority opinion tonight versus the Board of Selectmen, so we know what they are, so we can make it clear tomorrow morning what they are. That's what they've asked us to do. So that's what our goal is tonight, to try to get accomplished. All right, so I'm going to start screen sharing shortly.
So Kathy, can I just jump in for a minute here?
Yep.
So I have a list of topics that I wanted to address, and I think the premise on each of these is that we need to build consensus with the Board of Selectmen before we go into town meeting, because I think the last thing that we want to do is stand on town meeting floor and have advisory and BOS not agree on things. And I've done a lot of thinking over the last week on where the differences are, and I also did some research on other options to accomplish the same thing, but maybe not necessarily incur more expenses. So the first one is on.
Chelsea, hold on. Let me control this so we can get through this, okay? And then when there's something that you want to talk about is part of that, then you can talk about that. But let me keep going here to try to get this done. All right. I don't plan on revoting what we voted last week. I did. Chelsea does want to talk a few more minutes about youth and family services, so I told her we would do that for just a couple of minutes. But I didn't plan on revoting that unless I think that people change their mind. All right. So I was asked last week to do 3 things. We just did one of them. I was also asked to get the details about the Finn boiler because what we were told over this when we met with them changed and then it came back. So I had a really good conversation with Greg Martineau, who, and I'm going to quote him directly as far as what he said. So here we go. He said the Finn boiler he believes will easily last another 5 to 7 years. He said it's 21 years old right now. He says there are currently no issues with it. He says it does qualify for the MSBA Accelerated Repair Program. They'd already submitted that and got it approved, which is the same department that funds part of our schools. Because it's more than 20 years old, not because they think it needs to be replaced, not because of anything other than its age. But the project can be resubmitted in a few years. If we don't vote on this on June 13th, it cannot go forward. It cannot wait to the fall to be approved and they get done. They're already on a really, really tight schedule. He's already concerned it can't get done anyway because of COVID and delays that COVID is causing for contractors, et cetera. So he said that even with the vote on June 13th, it's really, really tight to be able to have it done before heating season gets here. The MSBA is going to pay for 37% of the project, like they always do, same percentage they paid for our new schools. Okay, so given that, I want to start there because we had listened to the schools this summer and the impression we all got is that it had to be done over the summer. It really needed to be done. Turns out it needed to be done over the summer. It was the timing more than it needed to be done. So if they were going to do it, they wanted to do it in the summer. It couldn't be postponed to the fall town meeting. So talking to him, I mean, that's the first time I'd heard, oh, it's actually fine. He thinks it's going to last 5 to 7 years. So this is not, I know what Mr. Rooney's going to say in a second. This is kicking the can down the road, maybe, but it's kicking it a pretty long way down the road. So it may even be outside the 5-year period that we've been looking at, which doesn't mean year 6 looks good either. We just haven't looked at year 6, but it certainly doesn't push it to next year. So it could fall outside the 5-year plan that we have been focused on. And as he says, of course, something can always go wrong, like with anything, but he was really comfortable with not doing anything with that boiler anytime soon. And that's not me embellishing anything he's saying or trying to put a spin on it. Okay, so let's start there and see what everybody thinks about keeping the boiler on the warrant for June 13th, or we could actually, now that we know this, we could push it to the fall, knowing that if we do that, it definitely will not happen right away. So what's the point of doing that if it's not going to happen right away?
So just to clarify, this is new information, correct?
It is.
All right, because
Yeah.
when they came before us before, this was an immediate need, if I remember correctly.
Yep, I think everybody remembers that. We felt, I mean, we all thought that that's what they were saying.
Yeah, but Tim, this is very similar to what was mentioned in Capital Committee, so that's why I kind of wanted the clarification. So it makes sense to me personally. I think we remove it until next year, especially if we approve it now. He might not even want to do it with getting contractors in there with COVID. So, let's just move it another year.
Kathy, the reason I have a problem about kicking things down the road is when those things get kicked and then impacts town services.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like this is going to impact any services. So, you know what? I would be leaving the kick on this one as well.
So if we're just going to do it to next year, I might say, well, who cares? But this is a big, I mean, he's saying it's fine. And he says it's going to last 5 to 7 years. He thinks. He's not an engineer, but that's what he thinks. He said, we've had no issues with it.
So what's the risk of moving it out?
Something happens to them, and then they have to do something quickly, which wouldn't be good, but you've got that risk with probably a lot of things right now.
If they're fine with it, and it's gonna reasonably operate this winter, then I'm fine with moving it as well.
So the capital planning committee has finished what I consider their short-term work, and so now the attention's being turned to the longer-term plan. And so we can leave it to them to basically put it where they think it should be, and then show us the plan. I mean, that to me would be a very logical way to approve it or to approach this.
Yeah, so Kathy, I would suggest, let's make a motion, take what the pulse is here, and then, we can bring it up in capital committee, and most likely they might have a similar opinion to us, but let's at least vote on it so that we can bring it to them.
Okay, let's do it.
All right, and make a motion that we suggest that the capital items for Finn Boiler be moved to fiscal year 22.
Second.
Okay, Judy Betts seconded. Andrew Pfaff made the motion. Okay, so Andrew Dennington, this is how we do votes now to try to be organized here, so we don't talk of each other. So we do it in alphabetical order. Judy's 1, I'm 2, you're 3, Chelsea's 4, Tim is 5, Andrew Pfaff is 6, and Mr. Rooney is 7. Okay. All right, so any further discussion? Okay, roll call vote. Judy?
Aye.
Cook, aye. Andrew?
Aye.
You have to say it.
Aye.
All right.
Malinowski.
Martell, aye.
Bath, aye.
Rooney, aye.
Okay, so 7-0. All righty. Okay, the last thing you guys asked me to report back to is an update on where Marty Healy stands with leading the effort to discuss pilot payments with the schools. And I have not had a chance to do that, so that's going to have to wait. So I just ran out of time. So I will get to it. Okay, now let's go back to the budget. So where we left off last week, we had a pretty long discussion about the impact of what we're calling the 2% budget. And I got an email from someone who watches these meetings quite often, and he said I was confused in the way I worded this. So just to be clear, what the town departments they were asked to do this, and they weren't all asked, but most were. They were asked to basically look at the budget that had been proposed last time we met in February, and take that budget and cut it by 2%. So it's not a year-over-year increase. It's taking what they had proposed and then taking 2% off of it. And that's what they did. Everyone that was asked to do it did do it, including the schools, at least K through 8. So is that clear? You may have already known that, but I was told I was very confusing about how I talked about it. So I just want to make it clear what was done in this exercise. Okay. All right. Okay, so I think we're going to start there again and just go one by one as far as the changes that were made to see what we agree on and what we still may not agree on.
Are you working on a screen share, Kathy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I'm not sure what I'm not doing right here. I'm hitting share screen. Vanessa?
Well, I'm going to try and make you host, Kathy, and see if that makes a difference.
Oh, it will make a difference, I think.
that helping at all?
No, there's something I'm not doing right. So I've got the screen in front of me that I want to share. It's on the screen I'm trying to share to. I'm hitting share screen.
At the bottom?
Yeah. But it's not working. Oh, maybe now.
Oh, here we go.
There you
Maybe.
go. Okay, good.
Okay, good.
Okay. All right. Does everybody see a spreadsheet that at the top left says 2%?
Yes.
Yep.
All right. So this hasn't changed since last week. Same thing we saw last week. Okay. So these are the departments that actually did reduce their proposed fiscal year 20 budget, fiscal year 21 budget by 2%. Okay, so just refresh your memory. The reduction is in column G, where my cursor is, where it just lit up in green. And the cuts were basically divided into two pots. One is those that affected salaries, which most of them didn't. And then column J is the other things that were cut to get to their 2%. All right. So what I thought I'd do is go through and make a case for the cut and then ask you guys to make a case against the cut if that's what you feel. So we really know where we agree, where we don't agree, and we'll discuss the ones we disagree with in more detail. All right, I'm gonna, the first two are, you know, $133 and $300, so I'm not gonna bother with those unless somebody really is adamantly opposed to cutting civil defense or personnel. Personnel was fine with the $300. I assume civil defense was fine with this 133. So I was going to skip over those two. Any objection?
Well, my only objection, Kathy, and I won't speak on each item, is I think I made clear last time. I think this exercise, although valuable, really undermines the entire budgeting process. When we asked the department heads to come before us initially with a very sharpened pencil budget, they did so. We voted on them, and now they've been asked to reduce it further. And the reduction, as at least in my opinion, is about $10 per quarter per month, per quarter per tax bill. And when we're sacrificing training, and I think it impacts town services. So it's just, I guess, an objection or an opposition to the entire process or procedure.
And that's valid. I mean, the adjective I would use, this was an arbitrary reduction. As we all know, smaller budgets are always hit harder than bigger budgets when they're asked to reduce the same thing. So this is definitely a regressive treatment of the smaller budgets. They're going to, you know, recreation has nothing but salary, so they had to cut people's hours. So the director has agreed to not work 28 hours, be unpaid, you know, not work, and the assistant 29 hours. So it definitely had a bigger impact, or was harder to do, maybe the better way to phrase it, on the smaller budgets than the three big ones, fire, police, and DPW. So that's a fact. So
Yeah,
I mean, that's a position, John. We could, you know,
Yeah.
you could say, I don't approve any of it.
And that's how I'll do it, because I do think it impacts town services. I think we serve both as an appointed and elected positions to try to do the best for the residents. And that's what the department head came to us the first time, and we spent hours vetting those budgets. And now with the 2% arbitrary, it impacts the provision of those services. So, and I'm not going to speak on each one, and there's a couple that I can't speak on, but I think I made my position clear last time, and nothing I have seen since or read since changes that.
So I've spent a lot of time looking at each of these line items and talking to a lot of the department heads that these are impacted by. And I think given the climate that we're in, a lot of these items probably won't happen in FY21 because of cuts that are, or because of things that can't happen because of COVID. And I do think it's an important for us to go through one by one, because I think we do owe it to the taxpayers to try to come up with a lower percentage budget, because I I really don't think we can say, it's just $40 on an average house. People are dealing with this in every industry with furloughs and layoffs. And so I do think it's our job and our duty to go through these and try to come up with a reduced budget for town meeting.
Yeah, I guess I take the opposite position. I do think it's arbitrary. It does impact not this year, but the following years in terms of this will now be the baseline moving forward. And whenever I see training and training being cut from public service departments, it gives me tremendous amount of indigestion. And it does quantify to $40 per household if you do the average residential tax bill, which is what we have to do. So, I mean, we can only operate with what we have. We only can quantify based upon what we know. And like I said, if the budgets initially were presented to us had any degree of movement in them, then I think this would be a valuable exercise. But we've asked them to go back again to do it. And in order for me to know, for instance, the impact to the police and the fire, I'd want the police and the fire to come and tell me about the training. What training is not going to happen?
So just to confirm what John's saying, I'm over here in real time changing the budget as we talk about this to see the impact. So I can change anything very quickly if you want to know what the year-over-year impact is. So he's exactly what it is, $40 a year to add back the whole $160,000. So he's got the number.
But I think we need to remember that this number does not include what K-8 and Algonquin came down. So I think I don't think we can sit here and say that we shouldn't take out the 160, because then on the flip side, schools could do the same. So I think we need to, I do think we need to do our part and do our due diligence on what, if we have an issue, then just pull that one line item out rather than saying, we're not going to take this 2% approach.
Well, we're going to go through each one of them. So
Kathy, can I say something generally? I thought we really went through this in a very logical way at the end of the last meeting and decided that what we were doing was really meaningless. John just, brought the same point up differently. It really does not impact the tax for most homeowners anyway. I just think we're repeating something that we went through.
okay, valid point, but Andrew wasn't there, so I want to make sure he's got a chance to get up to speed with us. But let me just say this again. If we push the start dates of all positions to January 1st, and we add back this $160,000, we still have a really low historical year-over-year increase. It's only 1.36%, which is actually now a little bit less than inflation. So it's still low no matter what we do here. So we're not talking about some crazy increase no matter what we do. So we are certainly in the realm of reasonableness no matter what we do here.
Kathy, can I ask a question about that 1.3%
Yep.
year-over-year increase you just mentioned?
Yep.
How much of that, before in the spring when we were talking about this, there was a concern that sometimes it might be kind of artificially low because we were postponing some capital items to a special fall town meeting. How does that factor into that number that you just mentioned?
Everything that we are considering for capital, spring and fall, even though it's kind of late spring and fall, is in that number, Andrew. And the reason it is because there's only two things that are being considered in the fall, and that is a hook lift truck and then the vehicle we just talked about. So that vehicle is in there. And the hook lift truck is going to probably be bonded, so it doesn't affect the fiscal year 21 taxes much anyway. It takes a while to get built, et cetera. So there's not a lot that's going to happen in the fall that's going to affect anything we're talking about now. Most of it's being considered right now.
Kathy, on the hook and lift truck, though, if we can't do it at the spring town meeting because we're over our bonding warrant, then we're going to need to. And Karen said that there's no benefit, and she can't. If you order it in the fall, she won't get it here for snow. So if it's not going to be in the spring, then we should punt it to 22.
Yeah, so you're right, Andrew. And it appears not to be something we can consider at June 13th, is what we're being told today. There's still some discussion with Aldo about what we can and can't do. So right now, we should assume that forklift truck cannot be considered in June. But now if I were Karen, I'd still want to push it to the fall and get it done so she knows she can get it. So she doesn't risk not getting it at all. But just to make sure we're clear here, nothing that we're considering in the fall is going to affect what we're talking about dollar-wise, Andrew.
Okay, thank you.
All right. And just to break out the two pieces, pulling forward the start dates of the new positions, increase the tax rate to exactly 1%, and then taking away the $160,000, increase it to 1.36% if you want the two broken. Okay, so Judy, I hear you. We did talk about it a lot. I still think there's a couple in here that, regardless of if you overall agree with John, then I still think there's a couple we got to talk about. If you overall agree with Chelsea that we ought to go one by one, then we go one by one. Okay, so let me just get kind of the flavor. Andrew Pfaff, what do you want to go one by one, or do you think you heard enough last week to kind of know what you want to do here?
I mean, I think we could go one by one, but I think I know the ones that I think that we voted on last time that I think are the key ones, and move forward with those changes.
Well, we didn't vote on these.
Well, we voted on, the keeping the 7/1 start dates, right?
Yes.
We voted on, did we vote on increasing the reserve fund to 250, or we just discussed it?
No, we just talked about we may need to, so we're going to talk about that separately.
And then
Okay.
we voted, but we did vote on the IT full-time position.
Yeah, so I'm not talking, so I agree. We voted, this is what we voted on. We voted on adding a full-time IT person starting July 1st. We voted on a full-time youth and family service person starting July 1st. And we voted for the two policemen to start July 1st and not January 1st. So that's what we voted on. What we're looking at here is $160,000. None of what we just talked about impacts this $160,000 unless I miss it.
It does or it doesn't impact?
Does not. This is separate.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So, Andrew, you're saying, Andrew Pfaff, you would like to look at a couple of these, look at them all?
I think, we could look at some of the very small ones, like recreation. For $1,900, is it worth it? But some of the ones, I think fire department's probably legitimate, police is probably legitimate.
Youth and family is legitimate?
To reduce?
No. No,
Okay.
to
Now,
maintain.
we're not talking about the person, Judy. We're talking about, they have said they reduced it with contracted services and mileage.
I mean, mileage, I assume, should be less just because of the nature of what we're doing. But again, we get back to the issue of to John's point, this exercise was a bit of futile when it didn't take into consideration anything having to do with COVID.
No. But remember, Brian and Mark did what they were instructed to do by the Board of Selectmen. That's who, they work for. So they just responded based on what they were asked to do.
But in their budget, Kathy, and maybe, I don't know if we've got clarification, but they're reducing 312 hours of hours for the selectmen, which directly impacts the residents. How are those hours spread out? And I mean, I again, to the extent you're asking as to which ones you want to discuss, that would be the top of my list, because to me, that's concerning.
Okay, so you want to start there?
I think you already know.
Let's just pick the ones we want to talk about for sure.
Yeah, you already know how I think I'm going to vote on these, so I don't want to direct which ones to go to. So
Yeah, and John, I'm not sure you're not going to prevail here. I can't tell. But there are a couple that I hope that we support, and I'll start with the first one, which is EDC. Remember, we had a problem with their budget because it went up so much, and so they have now backed down. They still have a really big year-over-year increase compared to others. It's still 7%, but it's half of what it used to be. John Wood supports this. So that one I would hope we'd at least carve out. So there's one. The Conservation Commission has eliminated their minute taker. So if we could just get the town to round up people who have time now to help us take minutes, that would take care of that one. They could add it back next year, but I do think there's probably people who can help take minutes. And we've asked Mark Purple to help us do that. He hasn't responded yet. I think he sent an email out, but I don't think he's done much to get it done. So there's one that you might want to continue to eliminate.
And in terms of an argument in opposition to that, obviously they put it in their budget because they were unable to get minutes taken by somebody else. And the provision of minutes and the recording of minutes is obviously an important component to town services. So
Yep.
I'm not sure that I would just agree that that's kind of something that they can try to find on their own, because I believe for years we've been trying to find people on our own.
We also have a lot of employees and departments in town who are not fully functional right now and may not be for some time. So I think we would be silly to not take advantage of utilizing people who are not able to do their job with their allotted hours.
Yeah, and John, now we're recording them. So all they need to do is go on YouTube, watch the meeting, and they can take the minutes during their normal working hours.
To John's point, I mean, we have people in this town who are litigious and who regularly go to the Attorney General and use the lack of meeting minutes as an excuse to target boards for punishment. And given the environment that we're in, I would not want to deprive them of a simple minute taker.
Okay.
But
So-
we're talking about cutting somebody's hours in another department. I think we could reallocate resources and have conversations with those employees to help the town. And like Andrew said, it doesn't have to be at that time of the meeting. You can always watch it after.
Anyone
Yeah, but-
else make a comment on that one?
The only comment is I agree with you 100%, Chelsea, but I don't think that's our responsibility to start allocating or reallocating hours. I think that's something that should have been done before the entire budget presentation was given to us. But be that as it may, I'm not sure that we should be the body, the entity saying X number of hours should be taken from this department and given to the Conservation Commission to conduct the recording of minutes.
Any other comment on that one?
I agree with John.
But then the other thing is, if people are at home not working, then maybe we should look at furloughs. I mean, I don't want to.
That's clearly outside our bailiwick.
I know it's outside our bailiwick. It's not our job, but it's, people have bandwidth. I mean, who's sitting at town hall receiving people?
Yeah, and for those that are opposed to doing this, remember the town has not furloughed anyone that I'm aware of, period. So there definitely are people that I think, because programs have been, the library's closed, right? The senior center is closed. So there should be people who could step into this as long as things are closed to do this. But if we don't agree, that's fine. We'll see. Okay, let me just keep going. Building department, travel supplies, contract services. Anybody have a issue with not doing that one?
My only question is, I don't know how much is each. So it's tough to, like, if it's $2,700 in travel and $80 in supplies, then I'm fine with it, because travel is going to be less. They're not going to be going to conferences or doing any of that kind of stuff. But it's tough to say. I don't know what the contracted services are, so I don't know if there's really an impact there.
Yeah, Kathy, that was the same question I had last time. I didn't know what the contracted services being.
Well,
reduced
let me
by
just say this. They reduced more than they had to. So one would think that if they really were trouble bite, they wouldn't have reduced it until except exactly what they needed to. So they went further than they needed to. They're 693 over what they had to. So that column that says difference required, that what you see as negative numbers, those departments went further than they had to. Okay, planning board. So this is software, training, and dues. And they did exactly what they were supposed to there, so they probably did have some trouble doing this. Town accountant. Chelsea, you want to handle this one because you've talked so much to Heidi about this one?
Talk to Heidi about this one. So if you remember, the original budget had 250 hours for Heidi to stay on to complete the audit after 7/1 as the new hire comes on. So she's reduced the 250 hours to 220 hours. So she reduced her time by 30. She had allocated 19 hours a week through, I believe, the beginning of September. And these 30 hours, she doesn't think will be an issue because she'll probably take some time off during the summer. So she was comfortable with having the 220, and whatever she doesn't use, she will obviously not use it if she doesn't need it. And then the travel reduced half and the training reduced by 25%. So there's a large accounting conference that she attends every March. And then there's a smaller one in June. So she cut the smaller one out of next year's budget, but kept the big March one in for the new hire, as well as the assistant town accountant. This assistant town accountant has not been to the big March conference yet. This will be, I believe this will be her third year going into the position. So she thought it was important that she keep that in, and that the June conference was fine to cut. So I mean, she was very confident that they could work with these cuts. So I would suggest that we go ahead and accept them.
Any comments on that one?
I'm fine with that, but Kathy, one thought I just had is, do we have any idea from Brian what the forecast is looking at for this year? Like, I know we haven't used all our minute taking money because we've been having trouble finding somebody, but we're going to return a bunch of that money. Do we know if there's going to be a lot of returns this year because of, you know, what's going on, and whether or not, you know, we're going to increase our free cash due to that?
Anticipation is the key to life, Andrew. So we are anticipating that more departments are going to return money because of the virus. School K through 8 has said they're going to return $100,000. They haven't returned anything for as long as I can remember. So there's one that's bigger than it normally is. The only department that returned any money that mattered last year was police, and they returned $70,000. I can't imagine the DPW is not going to return some money because of the winter.
Yeah.
So departments have been instructed to try not to spend anything that they don't need to spend. Don't spend their budget just because they've got it. So they've been asked not to do that. Whether that happens or not, I don't know. So there's nobody that has forecast what they think the return from the departments is going to be for 6/30/20.
Yeah, so that's my only concern, is that I had the same feeling that we're going to be returning a lot more this year, and now we're splitting hairs on, you know, 160K when we might have a more, you know, 300-400K return more than usual.
But that's going to go into free cash, which won't affect fiscal year 21. It will affect fiscal year 22 unless at the special town meeting we decide to appropriate it. That's
what I was kind of thinking, is we could appropriate it at the fall town meeting, and then it's less of an issue. We only have 2 months worth of, or 3 months worth of.
But you know, Andrew, that only means that the next year we start off with a smaller piggy bank than we normally do, which then drives up the tax rate the next year. So it's all timing as far as free cash goes. So I can't get too excited about doing that because it just affects next year.
Yeah, it's still more money than you usually have returned in. So your income's going to increase, and therefore your bottom line's going to decrease.
So for the year we need it, fiscal year 22, I'm hoping we start off with a really healthy free cash, maybe $2 million, right? It was $1.8 million this year, so maybe it's going to be 2.1. The local revenue this year still looks good, even with COVID, because the impact is really expected to be early next year, early fiscal year 21. So yeah, we could have a real healthy free cash going into fiscal year 22. We just won't know until September, October. So you're right.
Yeah, I mean, if we increase free cash flow 250K, that brings our tax rate down a lot.
Yeah, but we also need to factor in any revenue decreases too.
Yeah, but that's already in the budget we have here.
Not for, I'm talking about FY20.
Well, FY20 is not going to affect anything. We're going to end up receiving $5 million and we budgeted $3.5 million. So there's your $1.5 million free cash starting in. That's your starting point for free cash.
But we haven't been doing building permits and ticketing and
Yeah, but they're not down that much and they're not very big as far as other things. So I've seen a projection, so it's still $5 million. So we're going to have a good amount of free cash for fiscal year 20. That's very clear, like we normally do. It was $1.8 million this past year, so it may be more because of the, hopefully departments will return some money this year that normally don't.
Yep.
But long answer to your question, Andrew, I don't know the number. I just know schools have said $100,000 and that came straight out of Greg Martineau's mouth.
Okay, yeah, I just don't want to go through all this exercise to cut, make everybody paid, and then at the end of the day, we came in so under and our revenue was higher, then, you know, we're gonna be flush and people are gonna be losing hours.
Okay, the next one is one that I would hope we'd carve out no matter what, and that's because this is simply, he's taken the overtime that he was paying a former employee who's now with the police department to come back and train his new employee. Well, that new employee has been on the job for 9 months and Paul Sabelli is fine taking this out. He goes, "I'll take it out, it's fine." So Paul Sabelli has no issue with taking that overtime out of his budget.
sorry, can we go back to the town clerk? I don't know.
Oh, sorry, I skipped over it, but let's stick with assessor first and we'll go back to you. Right, I skipped over here. Okay, so that's one that John, I would carve out just because that's not, you're not going to see services reduced on that one. That's just paying someone
Yeah,
to
Right.
train someone and she's been trained for 9 months.
Yeah, and I think had that phenomenon or that set of circumstances been presented, he would have presented a budget without that to begin with. So
Yeah,
I agree.
So you're right, it shouldn't have been in there to begin with. You're right.
It's very different.
And I also, as a backup plan, I said, can't you just let her come over for a couple hours and her 40 hours to help? He said, absolutely. So there's a backup plan, even if she needs to come over. All right. Okay, back to town clerk. So I don't know if anyone wants to talk to Jim Haggerty. I have, and he is fine doing this. He does, the position is open right now. So he's just going to hire it. And the reason this one helps a lot more than 3.5 hours is because it takes this person from a benefited position to a non-benefited position. So she's going, or he or she's going from 22 hours to 18.5. So there's more to it than just that. You don't see the benefit number in here because this is does. Remember, salaries are in budgets, not benefits. So there's more of an impact here than what's reflected.
In terms of the quality of the employee, is that impacted if they're not benefited?
Common sense would tell you probably have a bigger pool, right? If you had a benefited position than one. I mean, 22 hours, to have to only work 22 hours and get benefits is pretty special, I think. I didn't know this was the case until he pointed this out, that he had one that was, you know, very part-time, but just over the threshold to get benefits.
And so Kathy, that 182 hours a year, how is that made up? By Jim just doing overtime as he's been doing from day one?
He just won't sleep. And he's very busy right now with all the stuff going on with the, you know, town election being by mail for the most part. He's very worried about the November election as far as how he's going to pull that one off. And I said, why don't you get some people to help you that are not as quite as busy? And he doesn't want to do that. He says he has to train them. He wants basically people he's trained do it. He says it costs more time trying to bring people in temporarily than it does to get his own person. So I did talk about that too, and he really does not want to do that. But when I sent our minutes in to be posted, the answer I got was, and I've never gotten this answer, is we're really, really busy right now. We're going to post it, but just not right away. All right. Any more comment on that one? So youth commission is what it says it is, contracted services and mileage, because they had to do it. So notice that there, they did exactly what they needed to do. So I think if you look at that column H, that's kind of a telling thing. When you see people doing more than what they were asked to do, that should tell you that they were probably maybe okay doing it. When it says 0, they did what they had to do. So I've got a problem with that one. I think Judy probably will have a problem with that one.
I think I have a problem with the contracted services, but I think when they talked last time that the mileage wasn't as much because they weren't going to the schools.
Yeah.
Or that kind of thing, but
That's small change in what their issues are.
do you happen
need
to know what the contracted services amount was out of the $3,000?
I will
I
find
don't.
it.
Yeah, I also think that Ms. Budka made a compelling argument that her workload or the type of work, both the quality and the quantity, have increased significantly as a result of this pandemic. So again, that would be one that I would be voting no on, Kathy.
Yeah, I would agree with you, John. I'm fine with restoring the full.
I think it's imperative that we continue to support them as much as we can because they're going to be really, really busy. So if they're not, I'm sure they are already.
Oh, they are. I was on a 3-hour call last night. Okay. Let's keep going. Council on Aging. John, you want to start on that one?
The only thing I just wouldn't repeat myself, which I tend to have been doing really too much here. But again, when we asked Pam to prepare a budget, she did it. I then sat down with her and Bill Harrington. We went over it again, got some additional information. They then presented the budget to us and we voted on it. And just now asking them to cut additional money, I think is not it's not an exercise. It's something that they obviously indicated they needed from the get-go, and now they're willing to give it up. And again, you know what? The senior center is utilized by a lot of people in town. And here it's going to impact furniture replacement.
Did we find out when their annual conference is? Because it may not be happening.
No, I didn't, and I'm happy to, if we wanted to vote to restore it, except for anything that they can't do, to actually take that out because of the time, I'm happy to do it that way.
Yeah, I think the annual conference fee, Chelsea, is related to signing up. It's a membership or a fee that even if they did it virtually, they may have to pay it. But don't hold me to that. I think that's what's involved there.
Kathy,
Yes, Andrew.
Andrew, a question about the notes non-salary of Council on Aging, because it's just cut off. I realized that I can't move it because it's screen shared.
Because you're seeing, okay,
Annual
so
conference and furniture replacement eliminated, comma, and then what does it say after that?
travel went down 55%.
I mean, I'm very,
55% sounds like a lot, but it's not much to begin with. That's why.
I'm very sympathetic to what John has been saying about the whole point of this exercise, but the Council on Aging budget, that does seem like one, the senior center has been closed throughout the whole COVID-19.
Yeah, but Andrew, they've had a whole associated source of other activities that they've been performing while the center is not open. And in fact, an argument could be made that they're busier now than they were pre-pandemic.
I think that's a fair point, John.
I'm sorry?
I said that's a fair point. I think that if you exempt the Board of Health because of the COVID pandemic, I think it's very odd to not exempt the board that services the most vulnerable segment of our community, especially during this pandemic.
Yeah, I would agree with Kathy's kind of thought that restore it unless we hear that, they can't make it to the conference because it's been canceled, and then we could.
And in other words, that fee really won't be spent. They're not going to do it remotely. They're not going to pay a fee. So if they really can't do that and that cost can wait, I'd say take it out. But as we all know, we spend so little on our seniors compared to what we spend on students, right? I mean, there's no comparison. Who has the COVID hit the worst by far is seniors, right? So I kind of hate to do a lot to that budget either, unless there really is something they're not going to do because of COVID, and it should come out. Because if you don't, then they can move that over to something else. So if you leave it in a budget, they can still move it around, right? They don't spend it, they can put it someplace else. And the travel, just so you know, is a big $2,800. So that 55% is $1,400. So $1,500. All right. I'm going to go back to Youth and Family Services and answer Andrew's question. So Andrew, their contracted services are 2,500. And that budget's come down year after year after year after year. It used to be $5,000 in 17, and then 25, 25, 25, 25. So it's been steady the last 1, 2, 3, 4 years. So that's what they're talking about.
I would vote, do we restore the 2,500 and leave the 600 off? But
Okay.
for $600, I'm fine restoring the whole thing.
Alrighty. Okay, let's keep going. MIS. So we heard what Tom said last week. You know, is he still here? Andrew, can you see if Tom is still here? I can. Well, I've got this. He was there for a while. I know Vanessa is doing the duties, but he was here. Anyway, he seemed to be fine with this, but there are a lot of people that think we don't spend enough on IT, period. That it's not an area you really should shortchange with all the dependency you have on it. So, Tim, what do you think?
Well, I think it's ironic that if we only have one IT person, he doesn't have time to train anyway. So, I mean, if the full-time position goes through, then I think that we should keep his training budget. But if it doesn't go through, then there's no point in giving him any training.
He did say that upgrade for Qualcomm he didn't need. So maybe we leave the training and get rid of that one. He seemed to think that should come out.
That was my understanding too.
All right. Board of Selectmen. If you look on the right, the non-salary one, they said that's redundant. So I don't know why we would restore that if he says it's redundant. So they took it out. And this is Mark Purple taking it out. So he should, I think he's comfortable with that one. The one we may have an issue with is the hours. So that's 6 hours of admin, 300 hours a year, as John said. There's 2 admin positions in the Board of Selectmen. They haven't told us how they're going to allocate this.
So this one, this is also higher than what it needed to come down.
Say that again, Chelsea.
This one's higher in your column H than what they needed to come down.
Yep. Yeah, so a lot higher too, right?
Right.
So I don't know if that was Mark Purple trying to set an example, or he really didn't need that $3,200, which I think there may be a little bit of both in that. But yeah, so I think the fact that this one came down a lot more than 2% tells you that that $3,200 should have come out to begin with.
Yeah, Kathy, my only concern is the allocation of the hours, who's being hit by it, the impact to that individual, the impact to that town person not being there for town services, and if there's any associated type of retirement issues associated with reduction in salary, which could impact that individual for more than just 1 year. I think those are all questions I think need to be asked and answered.
Okay, so what we could do is, for now, support the 3,200 and not the hour reduction.
I just want to agree with John. If that's the situation where we're going to actually cut someone's hours who's about to retire, that's really so unacceptable that I don't have words for it. And it's unfair.
All right, since we don't know who it is, I think we should stop talking about that piece of it for the moment, get some details. And then
Kathy, what is the 3,200 again? I guess I missed that.
he said that I don't know what EIP stands for, but he says it's redundant, and I don't know what MIIA, it's Massachusetts
Employee
Something
Assistance
Association.
Program.
What, Chelsea?
Employee Assistance Program.
Oh, okay, so
Right.
it
They're
sounds like
covered.
sounds like they can cover it through MIIA, so they don't need to have a special
Right,
amount set aside here.
right,
So that sounds reasonable to take out.
yes.
Yeah, because again, I don't think it should have been in there from the
I
get-go.
agree.
It's
So we've
redundant.
got 3 things that shouldn't have been in there to begin with. EDC shouldn't have had that big budget. Sorry, I'm going to keep saying that. assessor shouldn't have had the overtime in there, and this 3,200 shouldn't be in there. So I think we picked out 3 that should have been out to begin with.
And Vanessa's saying there's 2 plans, so they can dispense with the other one.
Okay, thank you, Vanessa. So how did you see her say that, Chelsea?
In the chat box at the bottom.
My chat box is at the top. Okay, all right, thanks, Vanessa. Okay, so let's keep going. Public buildings, that's John Pierce's department. So he's got a part-time electrician that he uses. And so he said he would, the only thing he could do is reduce the hours for that part-time electrician for the whole year, 4.5 hours per week. So he's just guessing as far as whether he could do without that. So there's no science behind that. Library. So this one's interesting too. So Judy, help me here. What they're saying here is they are willing, the way they got their 2%, and again, look at theirs, they did it exactly 2%, is they moved amounts that were in the fiscal year 21 budget. They're going to go ahead and spend it now, so they must have some money left over in fiscal. They think they're going to have money left over in fiscal year 20. So they're really not cutting anything. They're just going to do it now instead of next year.
I mean, I haven't talked to Ryan since this thing came out. I know that they went, that most of his budget is in personnel and the mandated things that he has to buy as part of the library consortium. So, and when I spoke to him, he emphasized at great length that cuts are going to come from staffing, which means ultimately that the library will not be able to be as open as and eventually we are going to want to go back to the library and have programs there.
Well, and also there's a line item of programming. I mean, one of the huge benefits of the library is that the programming that Ryan coordinates and puts stuff on. And I don't know what percentage programming is going to be cut, which then necessarily translates into the reduction of services to the residents.
Exactly.
But Judy, wouldn't you think that there would be some programs that they won't be able to do virtually?
There's always programs that they bring in people and pay them, the HINA, that one I think they pay for. There are things that they do that draw kids in. I think we need to be mindful of that. And I know that Kim has programs, significant programs for the children that are very, very popular. I mean, the library's a source for a lot of activity, a source for entertainment, for learning. I think we have to be supportive of it. So.
I also think we need to be fiscally responsible here. I think that people are not going to go to the library for a program right away. I think people are hesitant to bring their children places right now. So I just, right. But I mean, I think the library is probably going to be a phased approach, and they're going to have some sort of virtual or curbside thing. I mean, I really think I think we need to think about whether people are going to bring their, kids out in mass to go to a library program over the summer. I think we need to be careful here because I think Kathy's right. I think things are going to not happen because of what's going on.
Kathy, did you see Ryan's offer to speak to this? He's apparently on.
No, because the way I'm having trouble seeing. Okay, let me find him. My screen is just
I can
doing
let him.
something crazy. Can you get him in, Andrea? You're co-host.
Yeah. There you go, Ryan. You should be able to do it.
Hi guys.
Hey.
Thanks for letting me chime in. So we're not trying to spend money for things next year now. Just to clarify that, we are also trying to. I had a discussion with the Board of Trustees at the last meeting we're trying to sort of limit spending in the same way that's been proposed. We are planning to start curbside on June 8th, which is actually pretty soon. So we are going to have to purchase some materials like bags, and Kim is starting to put together a proposal for summer reading. So a lot of our services are moving from sort of inside the library to outside the library. That's sort of what we're looking at doing based on sort of, the governor's recommendation to do curbside and outdoor services right now. What we did with the budget reduction was we basically we were going to increase things like programming out of the budget in FY21. Sort of my first, as part of this, I looked at the FY 20 levels, right? So our programming budget, I think it was 2,900 and something in the new one. It's now down to 800, which is what we have for this year. So that funds about 2.5 programs. It means that we have to be pretty reliant on grant funding for any new programs. And we also have to sort of ask our friends group for a lot of support. I was trying to sort of balance that a little bit more since, like John said, so many of our residents want programming at the library. That's sort of feedback we get all the time. So, I mean, to Chelsea's point, I think programming is definitely going to look differently in the next several months. And we're moving as many things virtually as I think we're able to, but it's not going to be at the same volume that it was. So I was comfortable in recommending to the Board of Trustees that we reduce it for next year. And I also understand that that means it's going to put, I think, the pressure on us for the next couple years to also look at grant funding, friends support, and I'm okay with that. I mean, I've been able to sort of come up with creative programs, and I find a lot of bargains. I find a lot of people who are willing to do it at a reduced rate or free of charge. That's the structure we're going to be looking at, I think, for the next couple of years. Eventually, I would like to get back to the idea of getting programming budget funded.
Ryan,
So
it sounds.
Ryan, let me just interject. I'm sorry, I read this wrong. So now I understand what you're saying when you said you moved it to the fiscal year 20 amounts. I thought you meant, so I thought something different. And I'm looking at your old budget, and you've reduced programming a lot more than what you just said. It was 4,950 down to 800. So
yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't have the budget we did away with in front of me. I've made my peace with that budget going away. So, it was
but obviously you've whacked it because you were asked to, because you've got a zero here as far as the difference between what you whacked it to and what you had to do. So you did what you had to do, no more, which tells us that you're probably are cutting things that you don't want to cut.
And Ryan, it sounds like, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that you are approaching programming based upon cost as opposed to what residents might want. And that to me is a scale which can tip very heavily to one side. And I understand why you did it, but again, the feedback that I've gotten in my 10 plus years of being involved in town politics is that people love the library, not just because of the librarian, but also for because of the programs. And once you start cutting those and designing them on an annual basis based upon cost as opposed based upon desire, I don't think I think that's a slope that, if you start going down, it's going to really impact services to the residents.
I think we're in a different world right now, and I think for me at least, this is one that Ryan's essentially taking last year's budget minus salary increases and bringing the same amount over and saying that he has grant opportunities that maybe he wasn't planning on having to use for FY21, but he still is willing and able to look at those opportunities if in fact he can go after programming that people are willing to attend. I think at this point, we can't say that people are going to feel comfortable to go to programs in the next 6 months.
Yeah, but Chelsea, sometimes these programs then appear on cable, and people may not show up in the library, but they watch them over and over on Southborough, cable. So
Mhm.
I think you underestimate how popular the library is and the level of activity that goes on, particularly in the children's room. And if you drive by sometime. What?
I understand how popular the children's room is. I'm just concerned. I'm hearing what Ryan's saying in that he's actually not cutting from last year's budget to this year's budget. He's reducing the increases that he had. And Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong.
No,
No,
that's
he's going
correct.
back to last year's budget in a couple of cases.
Ryan, let me ask you this. Are there costs associated with you implementing these new procedures, these outdoor procedures that were not factored in when you presented your original budget, but which are now going to be, impacted in your budget moving forward?
I don't think it's going to, the short answer to that is yes. Obviously, we did not budget for doing outdoor curbside service. We are trying to make this safe as possible for residents who are going to want to utilize this service. We're still obviously developing the plan for how it's going to look. But we don't typically purchase bags in volume. I would say that's one potential cost. We're also exploring with Chief Achilles and John Parent whether or not material that we purchase that is COVID sort of related is FEMA or CARES Act reimbursable. So we're looking at a couple different options here. I don't think it's going to be a cost that is not doable.
Ryan, are you guys keeping everybody busy right now, including the pages? What's everybody doing? I don't need details, but so it's a general. So is everybody busy?
So all the full-time staff are reporting to work. They're not physically in the building every day. I'm there a lot, but and so is Kim. We're kind of in addition to developing curbside, we're also trying to plot out exactly what summer reading is going to look like, and we're trying to make it as consistent with prior years as is possible. Obviously, it's not going to be the same. A lot of the associates have been helping us remotely. I am coming up with a staffing structure for how they could start coming back physically to the building in June in a very limited way. We have been paying staff normally so far, and we're going to be doing that through June, but I'm going to be discussing potentially changing that with the library trustees in July. I think if staff members can sort of talk about the virtual work they're doing, if they can self-report on that, that's something that we'll look at allowing, I think, for the summer. But if people are not working, I don't think starting in July they're going to be paid. So, I know you guys have sort of touched upon furloughs. I have high school students who work at the library. If they're not at the library putting books away, they're not, I don't think we're going to pay them. I think that's where we're headed for July.
Well, we seem to, as a town, have an aversion to, and I'm using the word furlough, not layoff on purpose. In other words, temporary. And I don't understand why, given that the unemployment benefits that are available to people who work in Massachusetts are quite generous. So I don't know why we haven't focused on this more, but it's not advisory's place to, we don't do, that's not what we do. But I'm just surprised, and to me, library might be a place where it would be appropriate if you really cannot get people physically back.
I discussed this with the Board of Trustees. Our hope was that we would be able to come back in a reasonable amount of time. As the situation has progressed and as time has gone on, clearly this is going to, the building closure is going to be longer, I think, than I was initially anticipating. And I think the new fiscal year is really where we're looking at making a change. You know, the staff, I think the staff would be coming in and physically working if they were able to. And that was kind of a factor in some of the early discussions. And I was, you know, the American Library Association, the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners, they really encouraged us to try to not furlough staff whenever possible, because once you furlough staff, it's sometimes hard to get them back. And I think there's other communities that are going through that. You know, I'm in touch with the library director from Blackstone, and she's had to essentially lay off, I think, almost the entirety of her part-time staff. So even when they come back to operate, they're not going to be looking at having the same amount of hours available to the public. So I think that needs to be a consideration, at least for my department. You know, I don't know how the other departments are really looking at structure, but I would probably, you know, I would probably say that that's, people are in a similar boat as I am.
Anything else for Ryan?
Ryan, can you briefly give an overview of how the trustees voted on this budget cut?
I mean, it was a discussion that went on for quite a while. And, you know, the meeting was recorded. I would say we looked at, I presented both the 2% and then a 0% version with the amounts that Brian Ballantine had provided. And then there was a discussion after that in even going back and advocating for the original budget. You know, I thought Janet Maney is my newest trustee, and I know some of you know her well because you were on advisory with her. She, I thought, brought up a good point, which is, you know, all the departments were asked to make a reduction, and we wanted to try to be consistent with that effort. And I think she used the word being a good citizen. You know, we were trying to make sure that there's other people who are impacted by this. And I think it was just important for us to take a hard look at next year and what was going to be achievable and what potentially wasn't, or what was going to not happen. Staffing was the main thing I was interested in maintaining, because when we do come back, I want us to come back at 100%, you know, as quickly and as soon as we can. You know, some of the other line items, things like travel expenses, professional development, and even programs, I think were things that we had to take a hard look at. And, you know, we're definitely not going to be doing them in the library in the summer, and even in the fall. I think we're looking at a clear disruption in what we had planned.
Because of this budget cut, or because of the current situation we're in?
The current situation that we're in.
So are you concerned about not being able to run programs starting in January when you think you would be able to because of this budget cut?
We definitely would not be running programs in the same way that we had planned, even in January, because there would have been more funding that would have been available in January for them out of our budget.
But Ryan, long story short, if I understand what you're saying, the $7,000 hurts your programming, hurts your actual, none of this is easy to just cut for the sake of you don't actually need it. You know, it's going to affect some kind of service.
Yes, I think John kind of touched on this. You know, I always do a measured budget approach. You know, maybe the town administrator and finance director might not agree, but you know, I always try to budget for what I really think we're going to need in the next fiscal year. And having to make a cut was difficult. I'm not going to lie, and I had to really measure what the impact was going to be. And it will affect service. I mean, if you're asking me for sort of the bottom line, there's no way that a cut doesn't affect service. It does. You know, I tried to make that impact as little significantly as possible. I tried to minimize the impact as much as possible.
But still, 60% of the 7,000 is programs, just to be clear to everybody. So the programs got whacked.
Yeah. Okay. I think we're good with that one. Or I'm good.
All right. Thank you, Ryan. Okay. The next three, of course, are the big three departments, and so they've got bigger budgets than everyone, so they had more they had to cut dollar-wise. Chelsea, do you have a flavor for?
Yeah. So I did talk to both chiefs, so I'll do fire first. So fire added 4 admin hours to the proposed budget, which was not cut in this 2% recommendation. And when I talked to the chief, there's a few different types of trainings that happen within the fire service. And one of them is professional development training. So that's essentially your succession planning, you know, and whether or not those types of trainings will be happening, I think it's unclear. So that was part of what was reduced in this budget. The other part is the chief has been working with his firefighters to go to the fire academy and backfilling those shifts. So that's where you see some of the, in column I, the training, 50% OT coverage reduced. That's the backfill of those shifts. So that's nice to have, but that's not your boots on the ground, you know, every month training for your shifts that happen. So I felt more comfortable hearing that it wasn't the boots on the ground training that was happening that you need to do for EMS and for fire response. And then the other thing is the vehicle maintenance. He reduced that budget as well. So with that, I mean, I think overall he took what he could out of this budget. And I think with the vehicle maintenance, if we have more unexpected vehicles that need service, I think then we would probably need to accept that as a reserve fund transfer if we were to accept these cuts for next year. So that's kind of the overall for fire. I can talk about police too, unless somebody has a comment about that.
Go ahead.
So for police, he can rework some of his officers for the court time. So he seemed okay with having to shift that around. The reserve officer eliminated, there's only one reserve officer that he currently has, and that will be ending on 6/30. So that's money allocated as a specific line item, and it wasn't getting used every year. So that makes sense to chop that as well. And then again, the vehicle maintenance, I think, you know, if there was something unforeseen that came up, I think then we would be having a reserve fund discussion, but I think he felt okay with reducing some of that. And then the travel would be maybe some conferences. I didn't get into specifics on travel and the computer repairs. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't going to impact the service of public safety for the town.
Can you do the reserve officer again?
Reserve officer, sure. So he has one reserve officer right now. He said when he started, he had a lot more and the department was more reliant on them. So this is a retired, I think he was a sergeant, but I'm not positive, who fills in on certain shifts. So he's not compensated. He's not benefited. It's not a benefited position, but it's a separate line item in the budget. So he budgets for it, and then it ends up getting returned some of it because he doesn't work as many shifts as is allocated.
So did you say he didn't use it at all last year?
I don't know. I don't think he definitely used some of it, but he did not use all of it.
And
So
is he cutting it out completely, or is he just reducing it?
Yeah, I think it was $1,500 if I remember correctly.
It's $1,500 in total is what's on the line item, or he used $1,500?
No, I think it was in total, but I'll have to look up the number, Kathy. It wasn't a large sum.
Okay, so I can say that vehicle maintenance is not a reserve fund transfer. So that's not the solution if that's what they end up needing more money with. Okay, anybody got a question on those two before we go to DPW?
Just a question on the court costs. How is he computing court time?
So I think he's reallocating people on the day shift.
So if someone goes to court, then he brings on additional person on the day, or I didn't understand what that meant, court time.
You know what, John, I'm gonna have to follow up with.
Yeah, I was wondering whether or not Chelsea is trying to anticipate the fact that the courts are closed so that there may not be court time.
No,
And if
no, I think he was shifting resources around, John. I don't think he
Okay.
was banking on it not being open.
All right.
And I'd point out that these two, you're looking again, column H, fire department is 0 as far as what they did over what they had to do, and police department is $136. So they did what they had to do. They probably, this is not cases where they found things that should have been taken out to begin with. So I guess is another way to put it. You got any insight into that one? Other than what she says here?
I didn't speak to Karen.
Okay, so we've talked about him. We've talked about him twice now. It looks like there's probably going to be two schools of thoughts here. Tim, discussion is good, debate is good, different opinions are good. So if I ask you whether you are more on the John Rooney philosophy, which is, I really don't want to see hardly anything of this done because I don't want to cut services, versus Chelsea, who thinks that there is room to make these cuts and should make these cuts because of the economic situation we find ourselves in. Are you on one side more than the other?
Closer to John.
So, okay, and let's see, I know who Judy is. I think I know where Andrew is. Andrew D. Then you'll have to unmute yourself. Okay. So Andrew got to unmute. There you go.
Well, listening to this, I think I have really shifted more in Chelsea's side in this, just because. Also, this is a 2% cut off of the original budget requests for FY21, right?
Correct.
So it's not. Some of these may actually still be a year-over-year increase from FY20 to FY21. And as I just hear the discussion and think about some of the experience that everyone with a private employer is undergoing, where there's very difficult discussions about cuts. I just think that it's concerning that if the town is not willing to make some type of a cut, even if it's something that's kind of symbolic, right? And it's a kind of a blunt instrument to just go through every single budget and just say cut 2%, but it's a cut of 2% off of what was the FY21 request. It's not even actually in some cases a year-to-year dollar decrease. So I think that swung me more in the direction of Chelsea's view of things.
Well, I think we should point out that even with the 2% cuts here, that the year-over-year increase in the town budget is still going to be up 8.3%. So yeah, there's still big increases in these budgets, even with this in there. That's a fact. And it's across the board too. It's not just one. You might think, well, that's police, fire, and DPW. No, it's not. If you look at all of them, there's a lot of year-over-year big budget increases in departments this year.
And I think
with this in there,
if we don't accept most of these cuts, I think we need to be prepared to then have the schools come back and say, then we're not making these cuts.
I don't think that's the case, Chelsea, based on my conversation with Greg Martin. I think that they are pretty, they're okay with what they've done and they say it's going to last. It's not a one-year cut they've made. They've made changes that they think are good changes and they're happy. So I can't swear to, but I don't think that's going to happen.
So maybe I didn't phrase it right. I think we need to show the same type of action as the schools did.
Well, the schools have a much bigger budget to work with than youth and family services. So, you know, a 2% cut at schools is not the same thing as a, you know, $200,000 budget.
Youth and family services is up 19% year over year.
Yep, because they're adding a person. So you take that out, it's not. So maybe that's,
But I understand the school position, Kathy, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that in your discussions with them, that 400,000+ would go into the category of, well, maybe it shouldn't have been in there to begin with.
I think you're right.
So again, it's not that they're cutting salaries, they're cutting services, cutting programs, cutting training. They're cutting things that, you know what, really should have been cut to begin with. So I think there's a difference there.
But John, if you remember that when schools were in front of us in February, I asked how much what 100,000 off their budget would do. And they said people.
Yeah, absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
You know, and now they're coming down over 400,000 just on K through 8.
Without
Okay,
cutting,
but this is what happens. Wait a minute, guys. This is what happens. When we hear from them early in the year, they don't know for sure who's going to retire. Things still happen through June 30th. So what's happened is they've got some more people that are retiring than what they thought. When you retire a person who's been there for 25 years and bring someone on that's new, they save money. So I'm telling you that the impression I got that this was not heavy lifting. They also said they moved a whole program to Algonquin, so that just went away. So they may not have known they were going to move that program when we met with them. So things happened between early February and now that I think they have now been able to take into account. They know more now than they did back then. So the clear impression I got from talking to them is that they think they make good decisions. It's for the long term. This is not a one-year thing, which does imply they think they should do this. So I just don't think we're going to get pushed back. I'm not saying that both sides shouldn't share here, but I just don't think that we should necessarily push as hard on the town side just because the schools have done what they have done. There have been years where the school budget has been really, really large compared to the town, and it's reversed itself right now for a variety of reasons. Our demographics are going down, less kids, etc. So I'm not worried about the schools going, this is really not fair. It still doesn't mean we should reduce something on the town side, but I think that should not be the reason. Judy?
Yeah, can we revisit how much this would cost
Yep.
the average household?
Yep. So if we were to eliminate the entire $160,000, right? So worst case scenario, add it back, and we were to start the positions that we voted on July 1st instead of January 1st, then you're going to have a 1.36% year-over-year increase. The one thing I've left out of this, because I don't know what the number is, and maybe Tim can help here, is I haven't factored in the addition of the full-time MIS person, because I don't know what that means salary-wise.
And how much is that? I teach English. How much is that in dollars? 1.36 on the average house?
$144.
Yeah, and Kathy, I sent you a workbook that I've been working on, but I think the other thing is if we include the ones that I think we felt were really just budget cuts that shouldn't have been in the beginning, like I think the Board of Selectmen one, I think that one was okay. I don't remember exactly.
Yeah, Board of Selectmen, EDC, and assessors.
Assessors. What else was in there?
EDC, Economic Development, line 6.
Yeah, I think we were okay with that one. So basically, if we restored everything except for the ones that sounded like we were okay with, and if I take out it, so if we do that, that gets us to 1.17%, a $224 increase, which is $40, less than $40 more than what their full 2% budget increases. And Kathy, I did take out the Chiefs truck, the 60K there.
Okay.
And I didn't touch the reserve fund. The reserve fund moving to 250 is about 20 bips on its own. But so I think basically I went through as we were going through them and just kind of marked them as restored a pre 2% cut.
I still think we've got to at least, and Chelsea may disagree with this, at least agree, or maybe possibly disagree, that everything we're proposing doing, the worst case scenario, it still results in a very reasonable year-over-year increase. And no one has worked on small year-over-year increases more than I have the last few years. So I'm not one that wants to see a big year-over-year, but to say that it's 1.36%, that is a really, really responsible year-over-year increase. Our problem is the next 5 years. It's not this year. It was never this year. It's still not this year, even in this environment. 1.36, I just don't see how anyone can say we have not been fiscally sound and recognize the environment we're in with that. I'd even take that up to 2% and say you can still say that. So I wish somebody would push back on me about that. If we don't kind of agree with that, then I think we've got to talk a little bit more here.
Right. So I think whatever we do now, though, is going to roll into next year. So if we're not cutting the fat out now, then we're adding still, then we're compounding the next 5 years.
If you think it's fat.
Yeah, Chelsea, I don't think it's a Chelsea Rooney argument. I mean, Chelsea brings up some good points, and I've tried to, and obviously I haven't articulated it very well. I am only concerned about cutting of services, which I don't see as fat. And
Right.
when the presentation of the budgets to us initially, again, based upon the department heads, their professionalism, and the way they prepare their budgets, they didn't present us with budgets with fat to begin with.
Right.
And so I don't see this as cutting fat, but I do see it as impacting town services. And at what cost? Like, it's $10 a quarter per resident. To me, I just don't see why we would go down that trail of impacting services for that amount.
So I see two things on this list that I think impact services in the world that we live in today. One is the $800 in the treasurer collector budget that would send out the coupon on the third tax bill that we talked about last week. So that one I don't think that we should reduce the budget for that. And then the other one, I think, may go back to Kathy's point on the vehicle maintenance for the police and fire department, and maybe adding those pieces back in. But I think given the environment that we're in and the uncertainty of programs are not going to be what they were in FY20, and we're still talking about an increase to the overall budget for year over year. So I guess I don't see that we're cutting services, John.
Yeah, but again, and we've been through this enough. I don't think we need to continue. But when Ryan talks about cutting programs, to me, I see that as services. When Council on Aging is cutting services, I see that as impacting services. When the Board of Selectmen is reducing 300 hours, that's going to impact someone when they come into the townhouse. It's just inevitable. But again, I do think we're looking at it through the same glasses. We've just come out with a different overall philosophy. Now, if this exercise resulted in a significant decrease to the residents, I think we're having a different discussion.
Right.
But I've said enough, and Kathy, I'm tiring. I don't want to continue arguing it. I don't think there's a need to. But again, I'll defer to the chair.
Okay, so I'd like to try to come to a consensus tonight as to where we stand, at least the majority of the advisory committee, so that I can let Mark Purple know tomorrow. So we know where we're going to go on Tuesday night. So one way to approach this would be to support not cutting the budgets by the 2%, by the 167.43, however, supporting specific cuts. And I would name EDC, the 8,000. I would name the town clerk, his, because the reason I gave you that's really worth a whole lot more than 2376 because you get rid of the benefits too. That's worth a lot of money. The assessors, we talked about, that should come out for sure. And maybe that's it.
Board of
So that's
Selectmen
one.
EAP.
Oh, excuse me. So, sorry, Tim. You're right. EAP. So the EAP, the assessors, the EDC.
Is the
Yeah, the
EAP the whole of the Board of Selectmen?
No, that's a $3,200 of it.
Okay.
Okay. Are you tracking this, Andrew? So 30. So if you want to do the number, it's $3,200 for that. 8,000 for EDC. Town clerk is 2376.
So the EDC we're just keeping.
I'm just saying, yeah, yeah. So they reduced it by $8,000.
So we're not making an edit to what's in the budget right now. But we're making an edit to the Board of Selectmen to add back $3,200, or no, to add back everything but $3,200, right?
$3,200 plus 8,000.
No. So the budget right now is cut, right?
Yep.
That's the budget we're working off of. So
Yep.
for the Board of Selectmen, they cut $11,895. So we need to add back $11,895.
Hold on. This is what I would do, Andrew. You're going to add back 167.43 is what you're going to add back. So you add back the total first.
No, but I'm doing it budget by budget.
It's really easy to fix a spreadsheet. Let's just do it. Trust me on this one. Do it my way so I know what you're doing. We're going to add back 167.43. Then we're going to cut 8,000, 2376, 3,200.
The problem is we have to approve each budget individually, and now it's getting convoluted.
Okay, I understand, but we're not going to approve every budget tonight. We're just trying to come to a consensus on what we support as far as this 160. That's all I want to do tonight.
Okay.
Okay, because we still have to come to an agreement with the Board of Selectmen before we finally vote. So I need to be able to say this piece of it is what we don't support. Agree? And we are going to vote separately because we've got to vote in a way that John Rooney can vote for everything but a couple of budgets. So I'm not there yet. Okay? Regardless of what I told you earlier, I'm not ready to do that vote. Okay? So I just want to figure out what the impact is here. So right now I've got a 1.22% year-over-year increase when I take out the chief's vehicle. So I've taken that out. So now we're starting at 1.22. Okay, so the 1.22 has the entire 167.43 added back. And it's got all the positions that we have approved starting July 1st, except for IT. Because I need help in trying to quantify that one. Okay, so if I take that and I then subtract not going to change it that much. Okay, so that really doesn't change it. I mean, those are small numbers, so it changes it to 1.19 year over year. Heidi has also told Chelsea she's fine with her hours being reduced as far as her transition hours. And she's fine with one of her 2 conferences being taken out. That's not the important one. So we could also do her, but that's a small number too. So the things we're talking about adjusting, that 164, are very small. They're not going to impact very much at all.
Yeah, I mean, unless you hit fire, police, DPW, and most of the other departments, you're not going to move the needle.
Yep.
So I think it comes down to, I mean, I still think that if things shouldn't be spent, then we shouldn't have them in there. So I still think it makes sense to move it out, but you're not moving it out to reduce the tax rate.
Yeah, so what Chelsea's saying, if you look at column G, they're all really small numbers to get down to the last 3. And maybe Board of Selectmen. So they're all less than $10,000, way less, except for EDC. So we're dealing with really small numbers right now. So Mr. Rooney, what do you think we should do? What do you want to do here? You are muted. If you don't know, you are.
Kathy, for the MIS one of the 4,500, how much of that was the Polycon?
I don't remember. I'm not sure he told us. Let me see if I can tell him his budget.
Kathy, what are we waiting on right now?
I'm looking at the MIS budget to see if I can figure out what the Qualcomm cost is. I don't think I'm gonna be able to. I don't think you.
That's right. I'll put a $1,500 placeholder in for it.
Okay, but again, everything we're doing now is truly just, this is truly, as far as I'm concerned, penny wise and pound foolish. What I want to know tonight is, do we want to not support generally this $160,000? We can cut out a few of these that we've talked about, but do we want to support reducing the town's budgets by 160, or do we not want to? That's what I'm trying to find out right now as far as the majority opinion.
My opinion is no. I think my number ends up getting it to, I don't know, 140 or 130. Add back, so it's about a 30K discount.
Okay, so we know it should be reduced a little bit, right? We know there's some things that should come out. So I agree. So I'm not saying this is a perfect number, but it sounds to me like Judy, Andrew, John, me, and Tim, for the most part, support not doing this. It sounds like Andrew and Chelsea, for the most part, do support doing this. So it's a pretty good majority that don't think this is the proper exercise.
So is this something that we're willing to stand up at town meeting and make a presentation on not accepting?
No, we're not there yet. I think we meet with Board of Selectmen next week and basically make a case, and then from there decide where the compromise is going to be.
Well, for me, one of the ones, like, for instance, is cutting fire $30,000 when, you know, if we move his truck, it's $60,000. We're hitting a lot of these people in two places.
Yeah. I mean,
Maybe there's
I think-
a
I think the town
Andrew,
would
say
think,
say that again, Andrew.
So if we talked earlier with Jason on about the chief's vehicle of moving it to next year or possibly 2 or 3 years out to make it on a 5-year cycle. That's a $60,000 expense, not in this.
Okay,
Because
thank
it
you.
doesn't hit the operational budget.
and he
So-
had 2 in there at one time. We already took 1 out completely. So we're really taking 2 out. So he's been hit. There's no doubt about it. He's been hit.
So maybe we approach the fire budget as COVID versus not COVID, because I think there are some pieces in here that truly may not happen because of COVID. Like going to the fire training out of state. There's no travel going on right now, right? And maybe it will be. What was that?
Pay for it.
Remember, if someone doesn't spend a budget, it gets returned to the town. It doesn't carry over. I think that the audience at town meeting will think that we have not done our job. If we go to the town meeting and say we've got a budget difference with Board of Selectmen, they would change their taxes by $40. Asking them to come out in this environment to that meeting, especially if they are in the more at-risk group, which a lot of people at town meeting are, I think would be highly appropriate. So I just, I really think we're going to have to compromise here a little bit. Board of Selectmen have voted this budget. I'm not saying that we support them just to support them. We absolutely should be coming up with our own opinion, but this is not a year to, I think, worry about really small amounts of money, as long as the result is still a really reasonable year-over-year increase, which it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think of doing what we're talking about doing here, of adding a bunch back, we're at 1.19% increase.
Right.
It's 126
Can I just,
per house.
Kathy, to just kind of wrap it up, the consent, so the consensus to not support the, just a kind of a across the board reduction of 2% of what was your requested FY21.
Not support the exercise, but then support some very specific things that should have come out anyway. That
They're the
shouldn't have been in the
EDC,
budget.
the town clerk, the
EDC.
assessor's office.
Yep.
Pardon me?
Yep, you're exactly right. And then the EAP eliminated for the Board of Selectmen.
And the town accountant.
Okay. The big argument we're going to have with them is the full-time IT person, just so we know. So we've got to save that to the thing that we really argue about, if that's where we are really more adamant about. And last week we were.
And I was not at the last meeting, and I apologize for that, but that I do support. I agree with the group on that. That seems to be a point to really focus on. And given how there's going to be, there's more of a need for a better kind of continuity plan for IT now more than ever.
Okay, so how about this? How about the position that we take for with the Board of Selectmen is that we do not support the exercise of the 2% decreases. However, there are a few things in here that we think should have come out anyway. We'll list those. Chelsea and I will work between now and next Tuesday. Let everybody know what they are, the 4 or 5 things, list them. And that's where we are as far as the budget goes. We don't support the chief's vehicle for the spring town meeting, which is what CPC said anyway, so they should be fine with that one. They supported the CPC recommendation, so that should be fine. We think we want the Fenn boiler out of there, so that's another thing we got to bring up. And then we spend our time basically doing the substantive thing, which is convincing them that we've really got a problem with risk with the way the IT department is currently structured, and adding the part-time person is not going to solve that.
Kathy, do we have any idea what that incremental is? I plugged in 35K, but I have no idea if that's right.
Well, that's why I say a minute ago, I don't know either, Andrew. It's going to be less than Tom, so I didn't try to figure out what that was. So that's a number. So I don't know what the, so that's everything we've done does not include that.
22K, the same, right?
And Tim, I would defer to you in terms of the advocacy on
Me
the,
too.
the
I agree with Tim.
full-time
We'll let
versus
Tim
part-time.
basically, he has said it very eloquently, and
Yeah.
he is certainly passionate about it, so he can make the presentation next week to BOS. They're going to know it's coming. We'll get them teed up before
Mhm.
Tuesday, but I think that's where we spend our capital.
I agree.
Okay, so I just kind of outlined our plan. Is anyone who just this is straw poll, I'm not asking for official vote yet. Who is generally in favor of that plan for next Tuesday?
I am.
Okay,
Aye.
who said that?
Andrew.
Okay, Andrew Pfaff?
Yeah, you're talking about the plan is to pretty much go back with what our pseudo edits. So we take a couple things from there, we remove the chief's vehicle.
Chief's vehicle, fin boiler, and then 4 or 5 things from this that we don't think should have been there to begin with.
So I think more needs to be removed out of this list, but I'm not gonna, that's just my position.
Where does the fin boiler hit?
It
Debt service?
doesn't change anything because it was going to be bonded. So it doesn't change your taxes. It's going to affect next year.
Okay.
So it's not going to change any numbers, Andrew. We just need to make sure that they understand that we think it can last. Where it does affect you is the next 5 years. So it really would save money the next 5 years if it really is not something that should not be replaced for another 6 or 7 years. As we said, 5 to 7 years is what we said.
The only other one that we didn't really discuss that we discussed last time, but we never actually got a vote on is whether or not we should include the reserve fund. But I'm thinking with the stuff we're doing.
We're going to talk about that next. Let's keep that separate. Let's get this part done first, okay? We spent 2 hours on this. Okay, so other than Chelsea wanting to have more specific things come out of it, is everybody in general agreement with the plan for Tuesday?
I'd like to talk about the IT position. I just have I did some more research, so I just want to give an update on that.
Okay, so we'll talk about that. And Chelsea, I promised you 5 minutes on the new position for Youth and Family Services. Okay, so no one's saying no. So I'm assuming that we're in general agreement as to what our approach is going to be for Tuesday.
Yeah, I just think that we're going into it with a lot of things to be discussed. So I think we need, however we want to present it, I think it needs to be clear and concise, because I think there's a lot of variability here, and I don't think that we're coming to a consensus based on where they were at their last meeting.
I don't think we're at a consensus with them yet. That's the purpose of the meeting, but I think that we're at a consensus. And no one's saying anything, so I'm assuming they agree.
Kathy, one thing I asked last time, I think I asked that last time, although I may not have, is whether or not the Board of Selectmen understood the actual dollars associated with this 2% reduction on the quarterly tax bill. Because we got down into that granular detail. Did they get down to that granular detail? And did I ask that question last time or not?
Okay, I don't know if you asked it last time or not, but it doesn't matter.
I'm sorry.
It's fine to ask it again, even if you did. But I listened to the meeting. I participated in the meeting as a audience person, and they did not get down anywhere near to the granular discussion that we had the last 2 meetings. So that's a fact. Whether they looked at it on their own outside the meeting, I don't know. They may have, and maybe they've been fine, but they definitely did not discuss this. They weren't even going to pass the budget first, and then Brian said, I really think we should. So they decided to pass it. So they just passed it overall. They didn't have any changes to it as far as what had been presented by Brian and Mark. So I know I'm right about at the meeting they didn't discuss in details. Whether they did it on their own, I don't know. But nobody had an issue with anything that's here. The issues that were there that night were when the new employees started. And that was a split vote. Mr. Stivers and Mr. Kalenda wanted them to start July 1st, and the other 3 voted for January 1st. Marty Healy didn't want the new positions at all, but he ended up compromising saying January 1st if he had to choose between the 2. So that's where they spent their time talking, John, is the start date.
And I just with this 2%, I just think that there's other things in here that may not be happening in FY21, which is why I am really wanting to accept more of the 160.
Well, I would just ask this because it seems like the consensus is, because we need to move on, that the advisory committee doesn't accept the whole 160. Maybe Chelsea and I more did, but I just think maybe then the way it can be reported at the next meeting is while the view of the advisory committee is we want to restore much of the 160 that was proposed to be. And again, it's not really cut, it's really just not additional spending.
That's right.
But there was dissent. I just don't want it to be presented that it was unanimous.
The real
I don't-
problem is-
So we could do that, or we could come up with two different versions of the 160. We can meet 30 minutes before the joint meeting starts and vote officially on one or the other. So we could do it that way too. Because we do need to go in that meeting with, this is what we think should be the answer. So then we've got something to discuss with them. We can't be debating amongst ourselves once we start the joint meeting. We've got to have come to a vote, even if not unanimous, as to what we support.
Well, then what about, I think what you were proposing, Kathy, is to not do any of the 160 cut except for EDC, town clerk, assessor, and board of selectmen, right?
Correct.
So that's a concrete thing that we could vote on to kind of
What about the
move
building
on. So
facilities one? I thought John was okay with the electrician.
With which one?
The public buildings facilities, the electrician hours.
I don't think he made a comment on that one.
I thought he did.
Well, we'll see. He's muted right now.
Are you talking about me?
Yes.
I thought you meant talking about John Perrin.
No, you-
Again, he put that in his initial budget because he evaluated that you're gonna need 4.5 hours. Is that per year
No,
or
it's
per week?
Week.
Per week, which again would be 4.5 hours for electrician work, presumably within the town, for town services. I mean, who's gonna make that up, or is that electrical work just not gonna be done?
Well, we know they're going to build a bathroom. So
Yeah,
that's something that is usually not done. So we know they're going to build a bathroom. That's one thing we know that is going to happen. That's not usually done.
so Andrew, that's my only question is I don't understand its impact.
Yeah. I thought it was almost like hours for a part, like not an actual employee, like a contractor kind of a thing. And there was just less work to be done. So it wasn't that much of an impact.
Which means that Andrew, if he doesn't need him, he shouldn't use them anyway. So it should happen naturally.
That's the only one that I had a question on. And then the real question between everybody here is there's 3 buckets that are huge: fire, police, and DPW. So it's really, does anybody feel that we should keep those 3, or, those are the ones that move the needle?
And to
I think
defend, go ahead.
there's just no way to have a really informed discussion about it, because this is getting back to John's point of these budgets were really presented in a great amount of detail, and all of us just have a really kind of surface understanding of what the notes mean, what that consists of.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm saying is if we really wanted to dive into that, that's hours and hours of more work.
So, and
Realistically.
I talked to the chiefs multiple times, and obviously they put their budgets together knowing what they knew in February, and they both said to me that they could live with these budgets. So that's what's going to move the needle, right? And I didn't talk to Karen, but for the chiefs, I mean, like I said, travel is going to be limited in the next year, and that's part of what this is. And then on police, he will be able to live within the bounds of this. I think if we were talking about the 0% budget, then we would be having a different conversation. But I mean, if maybe we want to increase the vehicle maintenance a little bit more and not take $30K away from them, I think that might kind of come to a good compromise. But again, I think we need to look at the times that we're in, and we're going to have a fall town meeting. So if we have a major issue and we need to revisit it, I think we have the opportunity to do that if we think we're really going to run into trouble with managing the police and fire departments.
And I just want to clarify something. The departments were asked to cut their proposed budget by 2%, but the actual ask from the Board of Selectmen was not that. They asked Brian and Mark to come through with 2 budgets, one that ended up with a 2% year-over-year tax increase, and one that ended up with a 0% year-over-year increase. And the way Mark and Brian went about that is coincidentally, they asked people to cut their budgets by 2%. And it got them well below the 2% year-over-year increase. It got them down to 0.8%. So they didn't need to do anything further. They were so close to zero at that point because of what the schools did. So that's what the ask was. And so they got below what they were asking them to do with this anyway. And the electrician is actually on the payroll. He's 19 hours right now.
The only other thought I had is for the fire, police, and DPW. I would be okay with accepting, the budgets as is with those reductions and taking that 120K and moving it into the reserve fund. And, if something crazy comes up, then we have the money there, but, taking it out of their budgets.
Okay, well, that doesn't change your tax rate. I mean, that's going to
Keep
still.
the tax rates, but it gives us control over.
Yeah, but you know what? I think they should have control. I mean, we ask an awful lot of them. We ask them to put their budget together. They do a good job. I just think it sends the wrong signal is that, listen, we see what you're saying, but we're going to keep the purse strings on that. And if you need it, we'll give it to you. I'm not in favor of that.
Yeah.
And I'll give you a little bit on the DPW. If you remember a year ago when Karen Galligan came in front of Board of Selectmen, she said, okay, my year-over-year this year is 1 point something. She goes, and it's been that way for like 5 years. But let me tell you, everybody, that I can't do that anymore. Starting next year, which is this year, it's going to go up. I can't hold it down like I've held it down. I've cut. It's going to go back up next year, and it has. And so that's one reason I wouldn't necessarily want to try to get her to do what she's asked to do. This. She warned us. She has cut year over year. She's had really low budget increases for a long time. This is the first year she's had anything above, 1 or 2%. So I don't know. I still think we're talking about peanuts here. Okay, so this is my plan unless someone says adamantly no. Between now and next Tuesday, I'm going to work with Chelsea and come up with I'm going to take the 167.43 and carve out the things that we think should be carved out because they should have been carved out to begin with. They really should have been not in the budget. And then I'm going to work with Chelsea on carving out things that, in addition, that she thinks should be carved out. So we're going to have 2 versions of this that is then going to be sent to you so you can think about it before we get there to the Zoom meeting next Tuesday. And again, we're not at a table. We're doing this by Zoom so that when we meet 30 minutes before Board of Selectmen do, we're going to vote on one of the 2. Okay?
Yep.
Just,
Right.
I have one update on the police budget. So Chief Wallace moved the detective to full-time day shift to be backup for the court officer to cut down on overtime. So that's how the shifting of personnel happened. And it was working until now the courts are shut down, but that will continue as they open up in July.
Okay, so we can try to get that number and put that as one of the things that should have been out of there anyway. All right. Okay, so Chelsea, you have 5 minutes on family and youth services and you've got 5 minutes on IT.
Okay. So I thought about a lot of what we had discussed last week on youth and family services. And I don't want to kind of reopen up the whole conversation, but I did reach out to the department to get some more information about how they're operating today and what their needs are going forward. And I think even with getting a full-time admin, there's still gaps in what they were concerned about with crisis calls. So there are a few options to get some call centers that would be available around the clock to triage and deal with crisis calls coming in. So I would be an advocate to look at a long-term solution like that to help to give them more than actually what they're asking for, because I think hiring an admin to handle crisis calls is not really fulfilling what they need. And then looking at all the admin pieces that they are trying to fulfill, I think then we can kind of figure out how to best fit that, because by having this call center that they work with, it would alleviate some of the things that their social workers are having to deal with, and that's what's taking up a lot of their time. So also, I'll go back to my point of utilizing people who in town who are not being fully effective now, and we could get them help immediately rather than waiting until 7/1 or 1/1 for that position. And then we always have the fall to reevaluate to see what the true needs are, if the call center is working out. And, you know, obviously I'm not an expert in this area, but I would assume that they're getting voicemails at night and on the weekends, having to check their voicemail. They're all getting the way that residents call in, they can leave a voicemail for all of the social workers, and they're all having to respond to that one resident. So I just think there's a better way to give them what they need rather than just throwing bodies at this position.
Chelsea, weren't we just talking about somebody that had some training and would be able to keep things confidential? We weren't talking about hiring a new therapist, which sounds like what you're describing. And so I'm not sure.
And for the record, Sarah Castle and Chelsea have talked, and Sarah wrote a pretty long memo in response to Chelsea's concerns, and I'm just going to read a little piece of it. It says, utilizing an outsourced mental health call center can support a relatively narrow range of the functional needs, but it falls short on the important dimension of building a trusted relationship with the client and continuity of service for the department. So they don't agree with this, and I just don't know why we think we know better than they do as far as what they need. I mean, I think that we have spent a lot of time talking about this. I know Tim agrees. He has not been convinced either, but I just think most of us are convinced at this point. And so I don't intend to revote this, and unless it looks like the majority has changed their mind. And if you have, you need to say something pretty quick. Other than that, I think we're done with this one. So, Andrew Pfaff, have you changed your mind as far as what you think about the position?
No.
Okay, Judy?
No.
John?
No.
Andrew Dennington? You didn't get to vote last week, so it was a 4-2 vote, Andrew, just so you know.
For the full-time position.
Yes, 4 for the full-time,
So
2 against.
I'm in favor of the full-time position.
Okay, so that's 5-2.
And starting 7/1.
Okay. I appreciate all the work Chelsea has done. She really has talked through this. I mean, it's not like she just said, this is what I think. She has talked to Sarah. But, you know, John's talked to Sue Bucka. I talked to Sue Bucka and Sarah all the time. And so I'm sold on this one.
I just would hate to see us fund a position and then not be able to sustain it and then pay the unemployment.
I would think that if we find ourselves having to cut something, we'd cut something else other than this one, but I don't know.
So I think we need to get a commitment from Youth and Family that this position will not come before us to be upgraded to be a social worker, that it needs to stay as an admin position.
I don't know, Chelsea. I don't think that's fair either. You know, things change. They had a 3-year plan. This was part of it, which we approved last year. So I don't, you know, we don't dictate that kind of restriction on anybody else. I just don't know that it's our place to do that. If they were to come in front of us and ask for that, we can debate it then. But to make that a requirement of doing this, I don't think is particularly fair. Nor do I think we necessarily have the right to do it. Anybody disagree with that?
Sometimes I look at this area and I see just how big it could become, and it worries me. I mean, you know, the police talk about how the mental health checks and issues are an increasingly large number of their calls.
Yep.
It's not something that's getting smaller as the years go by. And this Youth and Family Services Department could easily grow 10 times and still be clamoring for resources. And so, you know, I'm not going to lie. If that's what the town wants, then, you know, great. But to have it grow drip by drip without a long-term vision, I worry about.
Well, they had, they came to the town last year, Board of Selectmen and us, with a 3-year plan, and this is year 2 of it. So they do have a plan. Plans are subject to change, but there is a relatively long-term plan where they were trying to change the way they do the services. This department used to be a little bit bigger, and then every year a little bit got cut, a little bit got cut, a little bit got cut, until it was really down to nothing. I think as far as what the town thinks, I don't know what the town as a whole thinks. I know people who understand this department have much sympathy for it. Those who don't know what they do sometimes are very critical of it. So I think it depends on who you talk to as far as what their opinion of it is. I mean, there's a time where people in advisory thought we shouldn't even have the department at all. To tell you how far apart we can be.
So I knew very little about it, and I spent a lot of time years ago with people over there. And, we're fortunate the majority of us in town do not have to utilize their services. But there is a whole group of people in this town that people do not know anything about that utilize those services. And it's really a critical department. And because of confidentiality issues, it has to remain somewhat in the dark. But my eyes were opened based upon, learning about what they do. And there's a lot of tragic issues that we just don't face on a day-to-day basis that a lot of people do.
And just to be clear, I'm not saying I'm not supportive of getting them an admin. I just think that we can do better by giving the residents opportunity to talk to someone at any time of day, which this admin position is not going to solve for. And I think that there's value in us getting them help now and reevaluating for a 1/1 start if we still think that we can't fill this position from somewhere within the town already. So, I don't want to come across as not supporting the needs of the department. I'm trying to come up with a creative way to give them more actually than what they're asking for on paper. Because when I looked at what the tasks were of the job, it looked like they needed more help than just an admin.
Okay, I think we truly have debated this one pretty thoroughly. So Chelsea, you want to talk about IT?
Sure. So I was reviewing the CARES Act over the weekend and the May 14th announcement by Governor Baker on what was available for funds for the town of Southborough between March 27th of 2020 and December of 2020. And it got me thinking of our conversation about the IT position. And there's been a large sum of money that has been allocated for Southborough that would be after your FEMA application. So there are funds available for COVID-related expenses that would go above and beyond what was budgeted for. So it got me thinking to the IT position and why we got to where we got to last week when we voted it. And I voted yes in support of the position because I do think that it's a gap in what we have. And, we've been talking about part-time versus full-time for several months now. And I am concerned about adding a fully benefited position given the sustainability of that position without it coming from somewhere else within the town. And I don't want to hire somebody today and then not have the funds to support it a year from now, although I think it is a void that we have. So I think that we do have some opportunity within the system to help the IT department. One being, and I don't know if this is a viable option or not, but there is an IT position at the library that maybe could kind of fill in for some of the immediate needs that Tom has. I know, and I kind of look at it as there's two types of people that Tom needs. He needs somebody to help him with his help desk tickets and printers not working and that kind of thing. And then we really need a Tom backup. And I think that the Tom backup full-time position that we voted on last week needs to be vetted more and we need to be able to go to town meeting and really be able to drive home that new position. And I think that if something were to happen in the meantime, then we do have this CARES Act to help us if we get into a bind for IT infrastructure. It is included in the CARES Act.
So it's my understanding that the expenses that we think are reimbursable, they've been computed and they're about to be submitted because there's a deadline next week to get those in. But it's not big numbers. It's like $40,000, and that doesn't include schools. That's the town side of it. So I don't know, Chelsea, if Brian and Mark are aware of what you're specifically talking about, because it doesn't sound like $40,000 includes very much.
So there's the first application for it is due on June 5th, and that's for expenses already incurred. And then the legislation that came out on May 14th says that there'll be another period for application, and that it would be for expenses incurred through December.
That would still be a reimbursement, right? So we would still have to approve the position.
But it's for unbudgeted, unforeseen expenses.
So let's stick with the full-time position that we voted on. So Tim, do you think this is ready for prime time, that we're ready to go to the Board of Selectmen and say, we really think we need this, we can make the case? Or should we at least should we say, we believe that this is something that needs to be looked at quickly. We want MTC to look at it and really come forward with, what the details of the position should be, because we've got to get Personnel Board to approve the position and the details of it next week. And I'm not sure that we've got those details right now. We've got a concept, but as far as really deciding what the position looks like and what the person's qualifications have to be, we haven't done that yet.
Well, I mean, there are three ways of tackling this. There's the Tom backup, right? Tom can't go on vacation, which is illegal. Tom can't get sick. He's not allowed. Tom can't take paternity leave. That's one problem. The second problem is it's very easy to list off 50 disciplines in IT that we aren't doing today. A typical $55 million company would have an IT group of at least 30 people. We have one. I mean, the things that we don't do are shocking and reckless. We don't do risk management. We don't do vulnerability assessments. We don't do vulnerability management. We do nothing on the security side. We do have partnerships with managed service providers. Don't ask me how Tom manages those, because that's a full-time job too.
Tom's back on if you need any questions from him.
Yeah. The third way of looking at this, of attacking this, is simply to benchmark against what other towns are doing. I haven't done that yet, but I'm willing to bet a lot of money that our neighboring towns don't have an IT group of exactly one person. So I honestly don't think it's a hard argument to make, but I'm not a selectman, so.
I could just add something quickly to what Tim said about how the reckless component to it. And I don't know if I mentioned this in the prior discussion about this, but over the last year, there's been a string of things in the news about municipal governments being hit by ransomware attacks, where people send phishing emails, then install malicious software, lock down all of your files, and then demand ransom from the city of Atlanta. I think got hit by this and paralyzed them for a month, and they're forced to pay the money. So that's another thing that increasing the IT support staff can do, is think more seriously about that, so we don't get hit by a ransomware attack.
Right. So one of the things that my company did in for this very reason was we were being targeted by spear phishing attacks. We created our own campaign, and we sent our own spear phishing against our own employees. And everybody who fell for it was then automatically obligated to take a training course. 30% of the company fell for it. And that is a
Oh my gosh.
highly trained, highly educated group of people. So
I'm bringing Tom LaFlamme in. He raised his hand. So let me just say this. I see Sam Stivers is in the audience. Advisory's brought this up before, not maybe as vocal as we are right now, but I know that Sam for years talked about how little we spend on IT. So we've raised this issue and we have looked at other towns, and Tim, you're right, other towns spend more than we do on IT, there's no doubt about it. You know, we haven't had Tom LaFlamme that long. We used to have a company that we outsourced everything to. And the decision was made to actually hire inside, right? So we went from totally outsourced to totally insourced. And that's where we are. So we've never had a real robust discussion about, you know, what we need in this day and age of all the dangers that we all know are out there. But the example that Tim just gave us, I mean, that's appalling.
yeah, we were surprised.
So I just don't know that we're ready to then say, we know we need one person. It really sounds like we need to get MTC involved, see what their recommendation is, so that we really do propose something that does, if not eliminate, at least reduce the risk substantially. So Tom, I pulled you in. Where are you?
Yeah,
There
thank
you
you. So I just wanted to address a couple of those points. We do phishing campaigns periodically. I have a couple of utilities for that. I actually have a company that is going to be running one as an outside source, and they are doing a vulnerability scan, a cybersecurity scan for us. So I am addressing some of those concerns, and I agree that it could be a full-time job just doing that. But I just wanted to make sure that everyone was aware that we are taking steps to protect against that. And, you know, the ransomware, we have a program that, you know, catches it at its source. So minimizes the damage done by such an attack. So we are taking steps. Just, you know, again, it's not a full-time person that's dedicated to just the security. So I appreciate that standpoint, but I just wanted to clarify that fact.
Thank you, Tom.
So I guess what my concern is that we're going to go to bat for this, which I agree that we need to get IT more support, but I don't want to go to town meeting and then have it fail and we don't have anything for support for Tom. So I would rather see us fully vet this with personnel board and Tom to make sure that we're in MTC and make sure that we're coming up with what the plan should be. We start cross-training people now to mitigate the risk and ask that Mr. Purple help Tom figure out how to come up with a network of support for Tom. And then we reevaluate this for fall town meeting. And you
Chelsea,
know, maybe
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you. There is no cross-training. There is no cross-training of resources. Your IT people, you're looking at a four-year degree, a computer science degree, plus internship, plus relevant experience. Even for desk support. I mean, I know Tom can bring a smart person in and train them for desk support, but this isn't like an admin position. There's nobody else in this town, in the townhouse, who's sitting twiddling their thumbs that can jump in and help Tom on some of these complicated technical issues.
So I think I'm talking about that Tom has two different types of, well, very many types of different functions that he's doing. And I do think that there are some things that can probably be done.
Be careful because, right. But also the more people you give to Tom, that's the more management Tom has to do of them, which is taking his time away from other areas.
Yeah, I'm looking to help him in the short term until we can have a solid plan for what the IT structure should look like. That's all I'm saying.
Andrew Pfaff, any comment?
I mean, I would just pulled up, Ashland's got 5 people, including 3 dedicated computer technicians.
Is that just for the town or is that for schools too?
I don't know, just as the directory. But that it's, I think Tom needs a full-time person. I'd like to see, maybe even some other ones, but I don't see the point on delaying the resource. I mean, we can approve the resource and then, they can work on the resume on how we're going to post it. But, it shouldn't take, I mean, if we approve this position July 1st, it shouldn't take them that long to understand exactly what the CV needs to look like. And on the personnel board side, that's just to create the actual job grade, right? It's not necessarily
Yes,
the exact day-to-day duties. It's just kind of creating a
a
grade
place for it. Yeah, a place for him to fit,
that person.
him or her to fit.
But I believe that would have to be in the SAP, which is bylaw, which is town meeting approval. So,
Yeah.
there's-
So the plan, Tom, is personnel is going to meet Wednesday and they've agreed to take it up.
Yeah, so I mean, just saying, if they can do that and put it into the town meeting for the bylaw and just create a spot for that person at that rate, then great. And approve it, and then, that give Mark time with Tom to work exactly what the job description needs to be posted on, and that person's exact duties and responsibilities and a training schedule. But I think waiting to the fall to do that, which means that person's not going to get hired until, who knows? Also, this is probably a pretty good hiring market considering unemployment's higher than it's ever been. So I'd vote for doing it earlier.
Not necessarily for IT people, though. How big is Ashland? They're a little bit bigger than us, right?
Like 13 or 14K, something like that. Look it up.
So Tim, what do you think about continuing along our path and trying to get this position approved for July 1st?
I agree with Andrew.
Judy?
Yeah, it's
What do you
fine.
think? Huh?
I think we want to hire someone. What's the precise question?
Or do you support recommending to the town that instead of hiring a part-time person July 1st, we want a full-time person that is extremely capable, that
Yes.
can step into Tom's shoes when needed, and if when not needed, can certainly help him improve the IT structure, for lack of a better term, in this town.
Yeah, I agree with that. Full-time.
Okay, Mr. Rooney, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. If I have a problem and a reboot and my computer doesn't fix it, then I'm in trouble. Conversely, if you need me to try an antitrust case, I can do it. But what Tim and Tom say, I rely on them 100%. So I'm all in favor of a full-time person starting tomorrow.
So it looks like Hopkinton's got 2 people. Okay, so it sounds like the vote we took last week stands. Where's Andrew? Andrew did.
Can I just ask Tim a question?
Of course.
Is there any value in looking to see if there's a pool of resources amongst towns for this kind of support?
Yeah, it's a great idea. I'm not certain how you go about it in terms of fair value, but
I mean,
there's a tremendous amount of work that can be done remotely by IT personnel.
yeah.
Kelsey, are you talking about volunteers or paid people?
No paid.
Yeah, I mean, you could do that for some desktop support stuff and, remote in and help people with, John's point of losing an icon or, something wrong with their email. But the question isn't that. The hardware, it's infrastructure, it's the IT, it's the real backup stuff. You can't outsource that. It has to be a full-time person that knows this organization, that's been here for a while, that understands all the nuts and bolts. I think expanding the support model to an offshore model or something like that in terms of some of the desktop or having 24/7, 365 availability for everything, having contracts with third-party people is a fantastic idea. But that's above and beyond what we need here.
Yeah, I guess, the reason why why I brought up the discussion again is I'm trying to build, I'm not trying to change the vote. I'm trying to build consensus around what we believe the IT department needs. And based on some of the things that Tim brought up, I don't know that the full-time position is the be-all end-all. And if there's other options, then that may factor into the type of person that Tom may be looking to hire.
But we're not dictating the exact person, at least yet. We're just trying to create room to find that, to find a person.
I mean, if it was me setting up my technology department with this type of organization and the amount of people and users, I would have probably 3 or 4 people, and having a deputy jack of all trades is probably the first person I would hire, and then look at maybe a junior desktop support and, or 2 of those, and a network admin. But I think, you hire that deputy jack of all trades to alleviate as much of your key man risk as you can. And then you work down the line as needs, escalate from there. But understanding what Tom does and what this organization, this town needs, I'm shocked he doesn't already have, a team of 4 or 5 people.
Kathy, this
Yes,
is Andrew. I just want to say we're now approaching the 3-hour mark, and we really are talking about things that have already been.
Yeah, so we voted on it, so it sounds like we're going to stick with our guns on that one and see what they say, right? Okay, so we're done there. So the last topic is the amount of the reserve fund. Right now, it is $180,000. So we had a little bit of a discussion last week as to whether we should increase that, given there may be some unusual things that happen next year because of the virus. Okay, so Andrew Pfaff. I'm just going to ask Andrew Pfaff, what do you think?
My thought would be, it depends on what we do with this 160K. If we end up keeping the 160K, I think we should move a significant portion of that into a reserve fund. If we cut that 160K reduction and add back 140 of it, then I think I'm fine where we are.
Okay.
I don't
Denny?
I don't understand that philosophy at all, Andrew. Can you help me out here? I
So
mean,
we're asking-
let me ask you this. I mean, essentially they're saying that if you don't think the department really needs it, put it into the reserve fund. But if they do need it, then we'll give it back to them.
What I'm saying is we ask the departments to artificially lower their budget without really taking into, anything having to do with COVID, or whether or not they can actually do that and still provide the services, or, if an emergency comes up, whether they don't have any buffer. So if we're arbitrarily just gonna, hit them for 160,000,
Okay.
I think there's stuff that's gonna pop up that we didn't know about because we artificially made them cut stuff.
Understood.
So it's good to have a
Understood.
little extra buffer. that we-
Disagree, but understood. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay, Judy.
Yeah, I have to hang up, Kathy. Are we almost done?
Yep, we are.
Yeah, I agree with John.
Okay, so you agree with what? Leaving it at 180?
Yeah,
Okay. I'm going fast here. So John, what do you think? Leave it at 180?
Yeah, I'd leave it.
Okay, Chelsea?
Leave it at 180. We have the CARES Act if something were to come up that we need to get reimbursement for.
Okay, and I think so too. So that we definitely majority on that one. Okay, so we're done with that one. There's nothing to vote on. It's already 180. I looked at Westboro. They've got 3 people in IT too. So I keep looking at all these towns around us. Okay, so I think we're done for the night. Let's see if there's any public comment. Quickly, there's still 4 people hanging in there. Any public comment? Okay, none. Okay, so the plan is we're going to meet with Board of Selectmen next Tuesday. We'll meet first at 6 and we'll join them at 6:30, unless you hear otherwise. Okay.
Kathy, are we meeting for purposes of voting or what?
Yep,
Again, I'm
Yep, we're
sorry.
going to try to vote next. I mean, Paul Semino has confirmed the meeting's going to be on 6:13. May end up being outdoors, but it's going to be on 6:13. So we got to vote next week to get ready for it.
And essentially, we're just voting on this 2% issue.
That we're voting to take out the Finn boiler. We're voting to take out the fire chief's truck or his vehicle.
Can we not do that now?
Well, we have already agreed to do,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to extend it. Again,
Okay.
we'll talk again next week. I'm just to
Okay.
be the third or fourth time we talked about this 2% thing.
all right. But we're trying to come to a consensus with the Board of Selectmen, John, so we go to town meeting with one
Sure,
budget.
sure,
Okay,
sure.
That's what we're trying to do,
Yep.
okay? That's a goal for next Tuesday. Okay, so is everybody okay for next Tuesday at 6 o'clock?
Yeah.
So I
Next.
see those.
Is that the 4th?
That is, no, it's got to be, so Monday is the 1st, right? So it's the 2nd?
The 2nd.
Right, so yeah, it's 2nd,
Okay.
okay? All right, so that's what we'll
Kathy,
do.
that would be the only meeting for next week, Tuesday?
That's what I think,
Yeah, okay.
okay? That's the goal, Andrew.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, motion to adjourn?
I move
So
we
moved.
adjourn.
Okay, Judy. Andrew, do you say second,
I
Andrew?
second.
Okay, all in favor? Roll
Aye.
call. Oh, wait, we got a roll call.
Buds, yes.
Cook, yes. Aye. Andrew? Dennington?
Yeah, Dennington, yes.
Malinowski, aye.
Martell, aye.
Bath, aye.
John?
Rooney.
John?
Rooney left.
Rooney, aye. Rooney, aye.
His mouth was moving. Okay. All right, guys, thank you. Well, we'll talk soon.
Thank
See
you.
you next Tuesday. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.